Good evening, everyone. We might get rolling with the meeting. It looks like everyone's taken the position in the gallery. Welcome, everyone, to the first meeting in the chamber of this year, and a happy new year to you all. I'd like to do an unusual start this evening. We have an award to represent, and I'd like to hand over to our Director of Urban Living, Mr. Scott Walker, at this point.
Thanks, Chair, for this opportunity to acknowledge an award recipient, and I'll call upon our Mayor, Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, to represent this award. It's a big congratulations to Amaya De Silva, who last Wednesday evening received the inaugural Cathy Mitchell Award from the Victorian Planning and Environmental Law Association. This award recognises excellence in a young or new professional working in the Victorian public sector. It is awarded to a young person who goes above and beyond and demonstrates exceptional initiative and endeavour. The aim of the award is to recognise outstanding contributions, foster a culture of excellence in the public sector, and contribute to public sector staff retention. I'd just like to read out what the award nomination actually said in regard to Amaya. Amaya De Silva is an exceptional planner who is committed to excellence in the Victorian public sector. Amaya has consistently demonstrated outstanding initiative and endeavour, making significant strides within the urban planning and environmental sustainability open space. Amaya is a hard-working and dynamic urban planner that makes an excellent contribution to the City of Boroondara and wider community. Amaya joined Council's Planning and Placemaking Department in 2019 as a senior urban planner after pursuing additional studies from RMIT University with a Master of International Urban and Environmental Management. Since 2019, she has worked in various roles within the urban planning space, including as a statutory planner and a climate change community educator. She has shown herself to be a quick learner and progressed her understanding of complex planning matters, and is currently also pursuing a secondment as a principal sustainability planner. Since joining Boroondara, Amaya has shown a curious mind and has excelled in countless projects outside her normal work. Her passion for seeking well-considered planning outcomes and educating the community on environmental sustainability is evident in her involvement in initiatives and projects such as working on the Sustainable Building Policy for Council, being part of a 12-week innovation program and leading a project to tackle heritage and sustainability in Boroondara, which has resulted in a new sustainability category in Boroondara's Urban Design Awards, preparing a design guide for solar panels in heritage areas, guest tutoring at Monash University in sustainability planning subjects, part of the Urban Design Awards and Outdoor Dining Program planning committees, working on the Planning Policy Framework translation, Clause 5206 for car parking and bicycle parking requirements, representative for Council, Planning and Sustainability at the CASB meetings. She has also volunteered to work on placemaking projects that utilise her planning and environmental sustainability knowledge and capabilities that benefit the city. Beyond individual achievements, Amaya has played a pivotal role in fostering a culture of excellence within our planning and placemaking department. Through her mentorship and collaboration, she has inspired her colleagues to strive for excellence, contributing to a positive and productive work environment. She's a team-oriented planner whose positive contributions have not only elevated the standard of excellence within the planning placemaking environment teams, but also a lasting impact on the wider community and city. Congratulations, Amaya. Please come forward and receive your award again. Thank you very much, Chair. We're very proud of Amaya, and it was a great recognition of not only the individual efforts of Amaya, but also, I think, the wider Boroondara Council and what we do to support our staff in developing and staying within the wonderful industry of local government. So well done, Mayor, and thank you for your support.
What a lovely way to start the year. Thank you, Scott. Returning to the business of the evening, tonight's meeting is of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee. Before we commence the meeting, I would request that all mobile telephones are switched off or turned to silent. Thank you very much. My name is Councillor Westgold and I'm Chair of this committee. I will start by introducing my fellow councillors. Seated to my left is Councillor Jim Park, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, who is our Deputy Mayor, Councillor Nick Stavrar, Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, who is our Mayor, and Councillor Di Gillies. On the other side of the horseshoe table is Councillor Cynthia Watson, Councillor Gary Thompson, Councillor Jane Addis, Councillor Susan Biggar, and Councillor Victor Franco. I acknowledge the Manager of Governance and Legal, Mr. Brian Wee, on my left, and you've already been introduced tonight to Scott Walker, our Director of Urban Living. There are quite a number of other officers in the chamber tonight, but we'll introduce them to you as it comes to the appropriate time. As a general introduction, I would have to say the Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting is live streamed on the Council YouTube to enable public viewing of these proceedings. The meeting is also being recorded and will be made available on the Council's YouTube as soon as practicable after the meeting. The primary purpose of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee is to deal with issues under the Planning and Environment Act and the Building Act. This committee is in fact a delegated authority, has delegated authority to make decisions on behalf of Council. For those presenting this evening, and I understand there's quite a few of you, when we come to the appropriate agenda item, it will be introduced in a report given by an officer. Then I will call you individually to come forward to the head of the horseshoe table. And when you are making your submission, we would ask you to please put your viewpoints clearly and concisely on why you support or oppose a planning application. Please do not repeat, if possible, what earlier speakers have said, and keep the submission focused on relevant issues and points not previously raised. If you are opposed to the planning application, please tell the committee why you disagree and possibly suggest an alternative approach that would satisfy your concerns. Please focus on your concerns rather than matters of history or details in the officer's report. There is a strict limit of 3 minutes on each speaker, including councillors. And whilst as chair I can vary this time, it is not customary to do so. At the 2.5 minute mark, I will sound a bell, which indicates that you have 30 seconds left to complete your presentation. For those in the gallery this evening, I would like to take this opportunity to remind you to extend due courtesy and respect to each other and to the committee as a whole. This includes, I would ask, remaining quiet while others are addressing the meeting and not disrupt the decision-making process of the committee. Turning then to apologies, Mr. Wee, are there any apologies this evening?
Through you, Chair, there are no apologies this evening.
Thank you. Then can I move to adoption of the previous minutes meetings? Councillors, can I please have a motion to adopt and confirm the minutes of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting held on the 4th of December 2023? Councillor Stavro?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
And a seconder? Councillor Addis, are you happy to second that? Thank you.
Happy to second.
Is there anyone opposed? I declare the motion carried. Oh, sorry. No one's opposed. Can I put that motion to the vote? Nick? Thank you. Victor? Thank you. It is unopposed. Thank you. I declare the motion carried. Moving to conflict of interest. councillors and council officers, are there any conflicts of interest that you wish to foreshadow for the matters on the agenda tonight? Councillor Thompson?
Thanks, Chair. No conflict of interest. However, I will point out that item 3.3, if it relates to Homes Victoria, any resolution that might come out of that, then I'll declare a conflict. But at the moment, the way that the officers report and the recommendations written, it's about DELP planning process, which I do not have a conflict with.
Thank you, Councillor. So, let's... Okay. Have I got that? Moving to the first item of planning business on tonight's meeting, 3.1, 336 to 338 Riversdale Road, which also has a frontage onto 2 Clive Road, Hawthorn. The proposal is for a 4-storey apartment building. Tonight, Aileen Chin and John Harper will present their report on behalf of council.
Good evening, everyone. I introduce today the proposal to construct a 4-storey apartment building comprising of 24 dwellings over basement parking in a residential growth zone. The address is 336 and 338 Riversdale Road and 2 Clive Road in Hawthorn East. The site is located within the residential growth zone in Schedule 1, titled Main Road Apartment Precincts. The purpose of Clause 3207 includes to provide housing such as apartment buildings up to 4 stories. The site is not affected by any overlays. The proposed building adopts a contemporary form and appearance, presenting a 3-storey facade to Riversdale Road with a recessive 4th floor. The building has been lowered towards the rear of the site to respond to the sloping topography. Vehicle access is via a central crossover on Clive Road. Notably, this is a repeat application on the site. A previous application sought a permit for the construction of a similar apartment building comprising of 26 dwellings and construction of a front fence higher than 2 meters. The previous application was refused in 2022 under delegation, with the decision upheld by the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal. Changes have since been introduced to the proposal from the previous decision plans, notably by way of improvements to the overall built form, including an increase in front setbacks to Riversdale Road, the stepping of the built form in the southeast to provide a transition to the neighbouring Neighbourhood Residential Zone 3, and further recession of the 4th level from the west and south. The landscape outcome has also been improved with further canopy tree planting opportunities introduced. A total of 20 objections have been received on the application. Issues and key considerations have been addressed within the planning assessment report, but briefly summarised as built form, scale, siting and massing, side and rear setbacks, transition in scale towards the Neighbourhood Residential Zone Schedule 3, daylight to new windows, and landscaping. In summary, the proposal is considered to be appropriate and acceptable for the following reasons. The proposal has strategic support. The planning scheme directs an increase in residential density within accessible and strategically appropriate locations. This is reflected in Council's Housing Framework Plan, which identifies the site for increased diversity and density, and also categorises the land as a main road apartment precinct. The subject site is located within an established residential area along a commercial corridor, is well located in relation to jobs, services, and public transport. The proposal is also well conceived from an architectural and urban design perspective, resulting in a high quality and contextual development, which will sit comfortably within its context. Furthermore, the development provides for an appropriate transition to the surrounding neighbourhood residential zones land. There's considerable landscaping opportunities. The development will achieve the planting of 26 canopy trees. This includes 2 large trees, 2 medium trees, and 22 small trees. The development accommodates the retention of a high amenity mature lemon-scented gum tree within the Clive Road setback. It achieves appropriate standards of on-site amenity, including outdoor space. It will not result in any undue off-site amenity impacts. It complies with all Clause 55, Res Code and Apartment Development objectives and most standards. It provides sufficient car parking and bicycle spaces. Traffic movements will not unduly impact the surrounding network. The development also achieves best practice in terms of sustainable design with a best score of 56%. Conditions are required to address site coverage and overlooking. The proposal is deemed to have responded to policy as well as issues raised in the previous application by the tribunal. Details of the proposal, discussion of all objections, and assessment against relevant controls and policies are contained in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. That completes your presentation. Thank you. We now come to the point where we can take public submissions. I understand in the gallery tonight we have 5 people that have indicated they wish to make submissions on this matter, 3 against, 1 in support, and 1 we're a little uncertain. Once I've announced your name, please come forward to the horseshoe table, and if a submitter is not present, I shall move on to the next speaker fairly promptly. I will at this point in time remind submitters that there is a strict 3-minute time limit. Please commence, each of you, if you'd commence your submission with your name and simply the suburb you live in. I first call upon Will Mason to come forward. We don't have Will Mason? We do. Terrific.
So where am I seeing? Just this one here. Thanks.
Now, can you start with your name and your suburb? And
Yeah, certainly.
Then off
Thanks
you
for
go.
the opportunity to present. So I'm Will Mason. I'm from 1 Clive Road, Hawthorne East, which is just up the road, and directly opposite the proposed development. Although I've repeatedly outlined my own objections to council and at VCAT, this is not just about me or my family, it's about the community. And one of the main questions we have as a community is whether the key issues raised by VCAT have been adequately addressed. And unfortunately, the view of the overwhelming community is that the developers have neglected to address the overall mass scale and design of the project. While we acknowledge some minor concessions have been made, the footprint itself displays little change to the visual eye from the street. It appears that little has changed since we stood along council to defend the integrity of the neighbourhood. But let's be clear, the community is not against development. The community is against inappropriate construction that inhibits the amenity of this beautiful street and this beautiful area that everyone is obviously so passionate about. We're aware that there's a degree of subjectivity in relation to what is and is not considered appropriate. However, when the overwhelming community remain unconvinced about this scheme, it really does have to hold some weight. Not a single person that I've spoken to in the community in recent weeks has been convinced by this proposal, by this scheme. And it's not unreasonable for me and the community I represent to ask council to place the highest level of scrutiny on the development. It's inconceivable that such a development could be allowed to continue when the matters at the core of this development are, in the eyes of the community, far from being resolved. Thank you.
thank you, Mr. Mason. Very timely. Councillors, if you just remain in your seat for a moment and see if there's any questions of you. Councillors, do you have any questions of this submitter tonight? We do. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation, Mr. Mason. in your opening remarks, you said that there were issues raised by VCAT which have not been addressed. In your view, what issues have not been addressed?
The key issue that I was pointing out is really the mass, and I was at the VCAT hearing and they did emphasise quite strongly the visual mass from the street, because the project is unusual in that it occupies 3 large blocks. And you look at other apartments in the area and they tend to, at best, occupy 2. So, you know, you've got the Riversdale Road aspect and then you're moving well up into a beautiful residential street and you've got that 4 levels that goes all the way up. So they said it's a massive sort of block. So from what my interpretation of that outcome from VCAT was that they wanted to make sure that that visual block was reduced so that it better integrated into the neighbourhood. And when we look at the plans and the community looks at the plans, in our view, it really hasn't addressed that fundamental issue. You know, there were other minor issues and other things that they have addressed to some extent. So we're not saying they haven't done anything, but they have negated some of the key concerns of the community. And some of those other issues will also be discussed with some of the other speakers as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Bigger.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, my question was fairly similar. I guess I'm just still trying to understand, is it for you, it's not one thing. It's not that it's 4 stories. It's not that it's the amount of space it's taking up on the block, or the way you are afraid it's going to look, or is it all of the above?
Look, we appreciate that there's going to be construction on that block, and you know, it is, we're not unreasonable about that, but we don't want it to look like there's a shopping centre or a hospital at the, you know, book anchoring our street. We've already got a retirement centre at the end of the street, which is 4 levels, it's massive. Then, you know, we're looking to put this other big development on this corner. We've got something, it's turning into something that the community's really not, it's scaring the community. You know, these people that are saying, I want to sell and get out and all this kind of stuff, and it's, you know, there's a lot of elderly in the street and people have been there for many years. So I think, you know, the council do have to actually consider those concerns. So we know there's going to be a development there, but what we want is that we want, you know, meaningful community engagement. You know, it makes sense that perhaps there is 4 stories on the Riversdale Road side, but don't bring it all the way up to someone's front door on the other side, and then, you know, and they're saying it's 4 levels, then they're putting a rooftop garden on the top, so that's a 5th level, and, you know, it goes on and on. So I think we've got to be realistic around what this thing actually looks like.
Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you, Mr. Mason. I will now call upon Mr. Paul Bennett to join us at the table.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors. My name's Paul Bennett. I live at 6 Clive Road, about 20 metres from the development, or the proposed development in Clive Road. Can I just initially take the opportunity to thank you for your time this evening, but also to council as we stood together in VCAT. We did lawyer up ourselves as a community group, and while I'm sitting here as Paul Bennett from Clive Road, we have a petition that we provided to council of 130 odd people, 20 odd objections, and as a community group we contributed a significant amount of money to stand with council against this proposal the way it's actually stood. So can I say thank you to council in the start of this process for being strong with its community. We know, as Will has said, that the building code doesn't cover everything, and there are judgments that council need to make. And today we'd like you to make a judgment in listening to the broader community that myself and Will and Michael, that you'll hear from shortly, represent. We'd also like you to really consider your character study, your neighbourhood study that you proudly put on your website, and about the livability, the characteristics of the neighbourhood that we stand for, and that you, so, as I said, so proudly put onto your website. At the heart of this is really the VCAT decision. We sat there for 4 days, we listened. We thought the member was extremely reasonable, as were the arguments put together by council and by our own lawyers. But there are issues raised by VCAT, we believe, that still have not been fully addressed. We'll raise them earlier: the overall massing scale design, the landscape, the 4-storey not receding adequately, and inadequate transition into your neighbourhood residential zone 3. We effectively have 3 to 4 metres away from the south side of the wall, looking straight into my neighbour's home. Can I draw you to a few conclusions that came from the VCAT decision? Point 116, I have found that the building's mass scale design, siting, landscape responses do not achieve an overall outcome. There is no evidence that we have seen to date that suggests that that has actually been addressed. The design does not go far enough to distinguish and emphasise the 3-storey base, nor adequately transitioned into neighbourhood residential zone 3. While the 4th storey has been modified, it remains pretty much the same footprint. Aileen, in her opening address, basically said that the design is basically similar.
Mr. Bennett, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up your presentation now. Thank you very
so
much.
one more point.
Quickly.
One more point. So the landscape setting itself is insufficient as found by the member for VCAT, and we've heard tonight that the landscaping has changed, but we've found there's only 4 extra trees on a block of over 2,000 square metres. So we ask council to please take that into account.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillors, are there any questions of this speaker tonight? None? Thank you very much, Mr. Bennett.
Thank you.
If I could now call upon Mr. Michael Herbig to come forward. If you could start with your name and the suburb in which you live. Thanks very much.
Certainly. So my name is Michael Herbig. I'm more of a proxy for my parents that live at number 26 Clive Road. That's John and Sally Herbig. I've lived in Clive Road at that dwelling for about 7 years in my 20s. I've also lived in other parts of the Burundara municipality. So I do know the area very well. And I've been involved in this development since the first original planning permit took place. Just quickly get myself organised. So there's really only just 2 things I just wanted to bring up in light of what everyone else has said, not to repeat. The things that I look at refer again to the southern boundary, which has been discussed quite a lot this evening. And my concerns in relation to the southern boundary have been mentioned about the residential growth zone that abuts the neighbourhood residential zone, which has that clash of height and development. So the neighbourhood residential zone is 2 stories high, the residential growth zone is 4 stories high, which has been mentioned tonight. I just really want to bring to council's attention, and thanks Aileen for being the town planner for attending tonight, which is great to have the planner here that you can hear our submissions. I'm just referring to, firstly, page 17 of the delegates report, which talks about that issue that I've just mentioned about the zones that abut from one to another and the design respects that you have to give to the heights of buildings. I also just wanted to bring attention, with that in mind, I wanted to bring attention clause 54.04, which is of the Burundara planning scheme, which talks about the amenity impacts, and specifically about standard A10, which talks about the side rear setbacks, which for a building of in excess of 13.5 metres should be a 8.6 metre setback, which, as far as I could see, looking just at the delegate report, that the plans that have been submitted thus far do not comply with that part of the planning scheme. And this is something I really wanted to bring to all of your attentions here tonight. I'm referring to the plans that were submitted as part of that delegate report on page 62 of 113 of that delegate report, which shows a line that needs to be amended, particularly on apartment 301, and there's also a minor amendment on apartment 302, and there's also another one on 302. So that's one part I just wanted to mention to you, and that was one of the reasons why VCAT refused the first submission application. The other part I just wanted to quickly talk about is and the final one, is the overshadow open space objective. With that, I looked at again, the delegate report, and referring to page 69 of 113, section 4, daylight modelling report.
Mr. Herbig, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up fairly
Yep,
promptly
I will,
now. Thank
yep.
you.
I couldn't see anything in the sustainability management plan about overshadowing, and I didn't notice that, and nor that I didn't see a report. There was a report mentioned, but it wasn't submitted, and I had trouble just understanding that paragraph about saying that there was some disagreements and the fencing wasn't included, but at the end it said, regardless of the report inconsistencies, the apartments comply with daylight standard. I'm just
Thank
not
you.
clear on that.
I think we've got
I'd
that
like
point.
to hear if anyone's got any ideas on that.
Thank you, Mr. Herbig. Councillors, are there any questions of this speaker? No one? Thank you indeed.
Okay, thanks.
I would now call upon Theo Biller.
Good evening to everyone, and Happy New Year to all of us and all of you. Thank you for allowing me to say a few words about this matter, 336 and 38.
Mr. Biller, can we just have
I live on Hawthorne East, not far from this development, on Cole Street, if you want to see the
Thank you.
geography or the map. Anyway, I don't want to dwell on what the predecessor was saying, but what I am saying for many, many years on this council, I'm not against developments, but not every development. We pay rates, myself for 45 years, and many other people for probably 100 years, and the impact of those developments on our livelihood, on our street security, etc., is going downhill. And what I suggest to the council, this development, I said yes and no. If it was a good one, was yes, but I believe has all the ingredients to be rejected. Why? Because nobody make a plan. The government, federal or local or council, VCAT, they just approve. But what are the resources? Now we have a lot of rain, but some 10 years ago, we were very short on rain. Infrastructure, water, on Eastern Hawthorne, all they have to be replaced. So the impact on those consumers, because they come up with 24 multiplied by 3-4 bins, it's a lot. And secondly, I suggest to the council to develop any future developments to have bigger collection bins, not to be in a street, because it's horrible. If you go to Berlin, Paris, Vienna, wherever in a civilized city, you don't see those on a street, the bins. They all inside and they are bigger sizes, etc. Secondly, I don't think everybody in this country has to live in East Hawthorne or in Camberwell or in our suburbs. We cannot protect ourselves from wrong decision, and I don't believe, yes, thank you, I don't believe the water is enough probably this year. Electricity, remember, 2 years ago or 5 years ago was restricted because they consume. And there's no, resources there to provide for those new developments. They are using, with due respect, strategy, all sorts of fancy words, but it's nothing and it's only empty. I'm against it, and I support whatever the others predecessor was saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Biller. Councillors, are there any questions of Mr. Biller tonight? There being none, you can return to the gallery. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And finally, I call Simon Martin to the horseshoe table.
Good evening, councillors. Simon Martin, Director of Planning at Ratio Consultants, here on behalf of the permit applicant this evening.
Could you just give your suburb to comply with what
Yes,
those
certainly.
numbers?
Cremorne, Richmond.
Thank you very
321.
much.
As outlined in the agenda report this evening, the proposal before us tonight represents a repeat application on the site following a refusal by VCAT in April 2023. I will keep our submissions concise this evening, however take this opportunity to highlight Council's obligation to support this application in light of the clear guidance offered by the Tribunal under the original refusal and the relevant case law established relating to repeat applications. VCAT member Baird, under the original refusal, refused to grant a permit, but in her reasons made it clear that the proposal before her was generally accepted but for several specified design shortcomings. These concerns have been appropriately resolved through this application before Council this evening, and this is outlined clearly in Council's Officer's report to Council on page 4, where it is noted the repeat application has strategic support clearly at this site, main road, residential growth zone, and where policy encourages diversity and density in development. The repeat application represents a high quality and contextual design response for this site. Considerable landscaping, as outlined this evening, is proposed, which includes 26 new trees and the retention of the existing gum at the site. Appropriate standards of on-site internal amenity will be provided for future residents, and the proposal is sought to appropriately manage off-site amenity impacts. The development complies with Clause 55 Res Code and all standards. Both on-site bicycle and car parking compliance with the planning scheme is achieved, and importantly, all referral departments are in support of this application of Council. Council's officer further states, and I quote, that significant changes have been introduced to the proposal, particularly by way of improvements to the overall form, warranting approval in this instance. I take this opportunity to further confirm that our client has reviewed the officer's recommendation and all permit conditions as written. We're supportive of all. I'd also like to thank the Planning Department for their efforts throughout this application. Councillors, thank you for your time this evening, and I'm happy to answer any questions that may be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Councillors, we have some questions tonight. Councillor Addis.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Mr. Martin. We've heard a number of the residents express concern that they don't believe this new proposal does adequately respond to the VCAT ruling. Could you just give me a sense of why you think it does, how it's changed, how it's improved?
Yeah, certainly. I guess one of the benefits of a VCAT refusal is when the refusal goes into the shortcomings of the proposal, and that's certainly what Member Baird did in the original application. Two of the key concerns were the front setback to Ridsdale Road. We had a non-compliance with the standard. That is now complied with. And the second shortcoming was really the transition to the south. We've got a laneway beyond on the southern side of the site, and the need to better assess the top levels of the development. So effectively what we've had to do is bite out the top two levels within that southern portion of the building or the development.
Can you give me an idea of by how much you've set it further away?
Certainly, yeah. From a yield perspective, we've gone from 26 to 24 units. We have increased the setbacks to now be fully B17 compliant to that southern interface. And one of the earlier speakers was talking to the potential for overshadowing. That is now compliant with Res Code as well. So numerically, it is set out in the agenda report tonight. I'd have to go back and actually review the numbers. But there are substantial changes at being at the top two levels.
Thank you.
Councillor Bigger.
Well, I've been pipped again with my question, but I guess I also just wanted to have you clarify your use of the word, I think you said in the beginning that was you wanted councillors to remember our obligation to approve this, and that makes me, might make some councillors feel a little twitchy, because I don't know that it's such a so black and white. I wonder why, and maybe I'm asking this in part for the benefit of the gallery, because I'm not sure that that's actually, would you say it's actually correct use of that term?
Yeah, and that's a good question. Certainly over the last 15 years through the tribunal, there's been an establishment of case law that relates to repeat applications. So where there's been a refusal and applicants come back second time round, the principles of that VCAT decision first time round, as I said, was very clear in where the shortcomings of the application were. So it gave direct parameters for our client and our architect to go back and respond, and we're certainly, in our view, achieved that.
Yeah, but fair enough. I guess what the comment you just made there, in your view, so it is obviously, you know, a subjective view about how those have been met or not met.
Correct.
So I think that is important to take into consideration. But thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that exhausts all questions tonight from the councillors. Thank you, Mr. Martin. Well, that exhausts the presentations on this matter. I now pass back to the officers for any comments applying.
Thank you very much for the submissions through you, Chair. In terms of a response, there's been a number of matters that have been raised. So in no particular order, in relation to the changes that have been introduced in the proposal, there's been some statement that it hasn't been approved by very much. So just to note, generally speaking, in terms of the high-level changes, as Mr. Martin has pointed out, there's been an increase in front setbacks to Riversdale Road of 1.2 metres on the lower 3 floors, so ground first and second. So that's one of the key changes. Second change is a stepping of the built form in the southeast. So that speaks directly towards the requirement to provide a transition to the neighbourhood residential zone 3, which is one of the key elements of the previous VCAT decision. So in terms of that, I can go into further detail if that is required. It does take a little bit of time to step through that, but basically there is an open corner to provide a visual relief in the southeast corner of the site by way of balconies. So setbacks have been increased in the southeast, but also the corner has been opened up with 4 balconies located there to really capture and capitalize on views and daylight that has been achieved in that particular location. Thirdly, there's also been a further recession of the top floor, so I might take the opportunity to respond to a bit of the question in terms of those exact setbacks. So council officers have also pushed for additional setbacks for that 4th floor, being a very sensitive and key interface element on the south elevation, and that has resulted in the current set of Section 57A plans that went out with the invites to this meeting. So those setback increases goes from the south between 600 millimetres, to 1.15 metres. So there's a range of improvements in additional setback there. From the west, it is an additional 2.62 metres on the top floor. So that describes the recession generally. In terms of other significant changes, it's also in relation to the landscape outcome. I'll speak to that a little bit more down the line, but this has resulted in further canopy tree planting opportunities with the reduction of services and decks within the street frontages. So previously, VCAT did criticise that it's not that the development didn't have the space for landscaping and canopy tree planting, it's that it was actually taken up by a lot of those services and decks. So those have been reduced within the current application. Moving on to building bulk and mass, so we have mentioned council officers consider that the fourth level is setback and forms a recessive element. This is also in line with the zoning and policy, which seeks to achieve residential densities and increased densities up to and including 4 stories. A central break is also provided on both of the street frontages, Clive and Riversdale Road. This assists to break up the built form and the mass of the development, and also helps to respond towards the streetscape and the main road context. To the west, the building is also stepped on Riversdale Road to provide a transition in height towards the double-storey flats on Riversdale Road, and it provides for a minimum separation of 7.2 metres from built form to built form. In terms of the fourth level, with materiality, it's clad in bronze metal, which will assist in its perception as a recessive element furthermore. The podium itself is treated with curved edges and a vertical fin, which will result in varied shaded blades throughout the day, some pale vertical brick pillars on the first and second floors with contrasting bronze metal finish. The massing is also tempered with space within the frontage and the side setbacks for canopy tree planting, which I've mentioned earlier, in order to screen the development. Moving on to the variation that is required for standard B17, which is side and rear setbacks. So the proposal does require variation against the standard. There is one general area of non-compliance, and that relates to the balcony balustrades and planter boxes within the balconies that's associated with 3 apartments on the western elevation. Those are apartments 204, 302, and 303. So there are varying degrees of encroachment into the B17 setback line. However, that is, as I mentioned, only associated with the balconies themselves, not the front or side walls of the building. So the areas of encroachment have a maximum shortfall of 1.06 meters. The location only occurs to the top of the balustrades and also includes the planter boxes. It's located at the front of the site. It's along a main road. It is directly adjacent to a common driveway and double-storey apartment building that has no habitable room windows that face the site at 332 Riversdale Road. So in situations where there's some discretion required against the standard, we look towards the decision guidelines of the clause. That allows us to consider several relevant factors. That includes policy and therefore the zone, strategic context, urban consolidation objectives, public transport options, as well as the design response and the impact on the amenity of habitable room windows and secluded private open space of existing dwellings. However, given that this interface is non-sensitive and there's a separation distance of 6 meters from built form to built form, officers consider that a variation to B17 can be supported in this instance. And on page 38, there are some diagrams with some clouds added to it in the report, just to show exactly where those areas of variation is required against the standard B17. I would note that for the remainder of the western and southern elevations, particularly the south elevation, the development complies with the standard. From the south elevation, the standard is actually taken from tidal boundary, so it doesn't encapsulate and utilize the 3-meter laneway, which would actually add to that side and rear setback for the south. Front setback was also mentioned. The proposal is compliant. This was a previous criticism of the VCAT decision, so the proposal now complies with standard B6. Moreover, in terms of the side street setback, as part of this standard, only 3 meters is required, and the proposal actually provides for 5 meters at the southern end of Clive Road, so more than complying with the requirements of street setbacks. In terms of the transition to the neighbourhood residential zone, we have made recommendations to design changes on the application, and these have been adopted and further increased in the proposal. It includes a reduction of built form in the southeast corner of the site and a greater recession for the 4-story from the east and south elevations. The combined effect has removed symmetry and visual dominance of the originally proposed building by introducing a more sensitive transition in scale to the south. My apologies. I think there's 2 more matters. In internal amenity, just in relation to Mr. Kirby's question, I was wondering if it was in relation to the ESD referral comments that are within the report. So I wasn't so clear on internal amenity. Was it a shadow? Yeah, sure. So I believe that the question was in relation to internal amenity of the proposed dwellings in relation to light that can enter those dwellings. That was a matter that was also raised by the tribunal previously. So the current application has submitted a sustainability management plan. That includes an assessment using the best daylight calculator. This indicates compliance with the minimum requirements of 50%, and the development actually achieves 81% in total for the relevant category. And it also includes a score of 100% compliance for daylight access to all living areas and bedrooms. Council's ESD officer has reviewed the development proposal as well as the sustainability management plan and is supportive of its findings. For those reasons, Council is satisfied that the internal amenity concerns raised by VCAT previously have been addressed. In relation to waste collection, this is the last matter. Mr. Bitter mentioned the number of bins that might be located on site. So it's private waste collection that is proposed. All of the waste collection will be undertaken on site within the basement of the site, and it won't be impacting on the street. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chin. Councillors, do you have any questions of officers tonight? Councillor Stavro, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question. I think one of the speakers, I can't remember which, asked about the rooftop communal garden, and that is in effect an extra floor, if you will, or extra story. Can you comment on that? That would take it over the 4 levels that we were speaking about.
Yes, Councillor, through you, Chair. So the top level, which is a rooftop terrace, as well as some solar panels and AC units, so that's not considered a story, simply because it doesn't have a roof. So we're not considering the rooftop as a story.
May I just follow up? So I'm just thinking about, it appears that it has walls but no roof. So the visual bulk is there. Does that have any implications?
I believe that, through you, Chair, I believe that it's balcony balustrades that surround the rooftop terrace, and there's no actual roof to it. So it, to be considered as a level, it needs to have a ceiling and a floor, for which it doesn't. And the proposal also complies with the maximum building height limits as well.
Thank you for the clarification.
There doesn't seem to be any further questions. Thanks very much. I guess we move now that I'm in search of a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I have a motion when you're ready.
Thank you, Councillor Gillies. Could you move your motion? Thank you very much.
Could the officers please put on the display, effectively it's the officers' recommendation with 3 additional points in red.
Do we have a seconder, or do you want a moment to consider this before a seconder puts their hand up?
Excuse me, Chair, without a seconder, can I ask a question of the officers before we go into debate?
Yep, go for it.
Do any of the three items that are listed up there have a material impact on the design, and therefore will it substantially change?
Through you, Chair, in relation to conditions 2A and B that we see on the screen at the moment, officers understand that there will not be any significant bearing on the application. The air conditioner condensers can be moved towards the east of its current location. So in terms of the two southern rows of air conditioning condenser units, to move them towards the east. So that is certainly possible to be accommodated within the current design without much bearing. In relation to condition 2C, so this probably would have some bearing on the overall design as a whole, particularly as it presents towards Riversdale Road. So officers are still of the view that the side setbacks are acceptable as proposed. Those reasons are articulated within our report, but in brief, the setbacks are considered to meet the objective of the standard and aligns with the built form expectations of the land. Given it's not located next to a sensitive area, they also won't result in undue amenity impacts. However, that said, if the western edge of the balcony balustrade and the planter boxes were conditioned to increase the setback to meet the numerical component of the standard, these will not impact on the private open space of each of the dwellings affected, which is apartments 204, 302, and 303. So they can still meet the standard. However, conditioning compliance would result in smaller areas of private open space, particularly for apartment 302 that only has one balcony. That would narrow it down to the minimum of 2 meters that's required by the standard. And it would also impact on the proportions of the building as well as the way that it presents towards the street as mentioned.
Councillor Addis, you have your light on. Are you still prepared to second the motion with that explanation?
Yes, as long as Councillor Gillies has had a moment to reflect on what the officers have just said.
I'll return to you then, Councillor Gillies. Do you want to stick with the motion as it shows on the screen at the moment?
Yes, please, Chair.
Councillor Addis. So we have a mover and a seconder. To assist the mover, is there anyone proposed to the motion as currently on the screen? We do. Thank you. Councillor Gillies, would you care to speak to your motion? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Pardon me. I thank the officers for their work on this application, including their communications with the local residents and myself, and I thank the presenters who came in tonight. It's quite true that when you move from Riversdale Road and the busy, congested arterial that is into Clive Road, you move into a quieter residential garden setting. So I can fully understand that that transition can be confronting to the local community. However, whilst I note that the VCAT members' findings state the proposal played a key role in strategic directions, it also presented an unacceptable combination of siting, mass and design. I note that subsequently all the matters in the VCAT report have been addressed, and with the addition of these 3 more controls intended to address some of the concerns we've heard tonight, I believe a reasonable and fully compliant outcome is presented tonight. Sadly, we do have to be realistic regarding what we can defend in seeking further concessions with a proposal that could constitute a revisit to VCAT, should the proposal be rejected by Council tonight. The overshadowing issue, I think, has been addressed, Ms Chin. Thank you very much for that. So, on the basis of that, I seek my council colleagues' support for this motion, please.
Councillor Addis, do you wish to speak at this point in time or hold your rights till later?
I'll reserve. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillors, does anyone else wish to speak at this point in time? No volunteers. Councillor Addis, it's over to you.
I don't quite know what to say, in that I think it speaks for itself that Councillor Gillies has basically painted the picture of, while given that we often don't particularly like developments, we can sometimes feel we have no other recourse but to support them for all the rules of the game reasons. So supporting it doesn't necessarily mean we particularly like it. It just means we think it's supportable, and I suspect that's what Councillor Gillies is saying, but I am happy to support it on that basis.
Thank you, Councillor Addis. Councillor Gillies, do you want to comment further?
I think we've said enough. Thank you, Chair.
My apologies. Councillor Watson, I missed your light.
Thank you, Chair. I will be supporting this motion tonight, but with a great deal of reluctance. This isn't the first time we've heard community come and express their concern about the transition zone between NRZ and GRZ. Now, when I look at the transitioning that's been done for this development, I can see what's been done. I can certainly take the officer's advice that it's been done within, in accordance to the regulations. But when you look at the laneway, you can well and truly, in particular, you can well and truly see the concerns of the residents, because there's significant canyoning that will happen because of the height of this proposed dwelling. So, while my concerns probably rest outside this chamber, I really think that the state government need to give councils greater ability to speak with developers about the transition between two zones, so that they can be done in a way that the community find acceptable. Unfortunately, because it complies tonight, I absolutely understand that it's not acceptable, but it complies. So I will be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Gillies, do you wish to speak further?
No further to add, thank you, Chair. I just seek my colleagues' support for all the reasons already stated.
Thank you, Councillor. To the gallery, we will now be putting the motion for support. All of those in favour of the motion as it's currently on the screen? Thank you. All of those against? I would have to declare the motion carried. Thank you. Yeah. All right. We will now move to item 3.2 on the agenda tonight. 7 Mangara Road, Canterbury, the fire damaged heritage building in a specific controlled overlay. Okay. The officers' report tonight will be presented by Marie Sharif. Thank you. When you're ready. Look, just while the officers are preparing themselves, I would just like to take this opportunity to point out that I realise there's a fair level of emotion around this matter. And after the officers have given their report, the gallery will be given its opportunity to speak. I would ask you to be respectful of other opinions in the room and under no circumstances use defamatory comments, because under the rules of this discussion, we will have to close it down if that occurs. So in advance, I just ask you to please be respectful in this debate. So if I could hand over to the officers, that'd be great.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Good evening, councillors, officers and attendees. On Saturday, 9th December 2023, the heritage dwelling known as Shenley Croft at 7 Mangara Road in Canterbury was set on fire and mostly destroyed. Victoria Police are treating the fire as suspicious and a confirmed arson. However, they have not laid any charges. Shenley Croft has been protected in the Burundara Heritage Overlay as an individually significant heritage place since 2009, when Amendment C64 was gazetted. Since its most recent sale in November 2020, the house has remained vacant, progressively fallen into disrepair, and has now been mostly destroyed by arson. The disrepair and unlawful demolition of Shenley Croft raises concern about the heritage overlay and its ability to protect heritage places. There is a need to prevent the heritage overlay being circumvented by unlawful demolition of heritage places or allowing them to fall into disrepair. There is also a need to mitigate the potential development gains that could arise from such neglect and unlawful demolition. Section 6B of the Planning and Environment Act 1987 was introduced to address these issues as a result of the unlawful demolition of the Corkman pub in the City of Melbourne. The intention of Section 6B is to deter and prevent parties from obtaining benefit from unlawfully demolishing heritage buildings or allowing heritage buildings to fall into disrepair resulting in demolition. Pursuant to Section 6B of the Act, the Specific Controls Overlay, or the SCO, at Clause 45.12 of the planning scheme, can be applied to a property to prevent or restrict development where a heritage building has been unlawfully demolished or allowed to fall into disrepair resulting in demolition. The demolition of Shenley Croft by an act of arson constitutes unlawful demolition as intended by Section 6B of the Act. The SCO, or Specific Controls Overlay, would introduce a control whereby a planning permit cannot be granted for development other than in accordance with the conditions of an incorporated document which requires reconstruction of the heritage building. A planning scheme amendment is required to apply the SCO to the land and to introduce an incorporated document. The amendment would also send a cautionary signal to deter persons from unlawfully demolishing heritage buildings or allowing heritage buildings to fall into disrepair in the future. On 10th of January 2024, this year, officers sent a letter of intent to the Department of Transport and Planning seeking ministerial intervention to amend the Burundara planning scheme pursuant to Section 20 Part 4 of the Act to apply the SCO to 7 Mangara Road, Canterbury on a permanent basis to prevent the development of the property other than for the reconstruction of the heritage building Shenley Croft. On 2nd of February 2024, officers received a letter from the National Trust of Victoria in support of the proposed SCO at Shenley Croft. Officers have also received written support from the member for Kooyong, Dr. Monique Ryan, MP,
A copy of these has been provided via email to the councillors today, and we've also provided printed copies for you to refer to at your table there. I think we didn't give one to... Officers have also received a late submission this afternoon from the Property Director of Wang Corporation on behalf of the owner of Shenley Croft. The submission requests that Council defer and withdraw the request to the Minister for Planning for the proposed SCO. Again, a copy of this submission has also been forwarded via email to all the councillors, and a hard copy is also with you. Officers ask that the Urban Planning Delegated Committee resolve to, firstly, confirm and formally request the Minister for Planning to exercise powers pursuant to Section 20, Part 4 of the Planning and Environment Act to amend the Burundara planning scheme to apply the specific controls overlay and associated incorporated document on a permanent basis to the land at 7 Mangara Road, Canterbury. Secondly, we also seek your resolve on whether to authorise the Director of Urban Living to take all necessary action to respond to the unlawful demolition of the heritage property at 7 Mangara Road, Canterbury, and to seek to ensure any future development of the property includes the reconstruction of the heritage building through appropriate planning controls, which may include requesting ministerial authorisation to prepare a planning scheme amendment if necessary. And that's all, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sharif. We now move to public presentations from the gallery. I understand that 7 people tonight have asked to speak. All appear to be in support of the officer's recommendations. Again, once I announce your name, please move forward and sit at the head of the table. Again, if a submitter isn't present, I shall move on to the next submitter. I shall take this opportunity to remind submitters that there is a strict limit of 3 minutes on your presentation. And again, I would ask you to commence your submission with your name and the suburb in which you live. So if I could move to the first presenter for tonight, Anne James, would you please come forward?
Good evening and thank you. I will be brief because I think others will give you a bit more background, but I would say that I ask the committee...
And can you just start with, we know your name, but start with it and your suburb. Thank you very much.
And we've been residents, our family's been residents for over 50 years, and we live nearby, not in the same street. But we ask that the UPDC endorses what the officers, or the officers' 2 recommendations, to ensure the integrity of the heritage listing which you councillors have proposed. It will make a mockery of the heritage listing if this property, which has been neglected since it's been bought, overtly neglected and in fact encouraged for more neglect by being left open. We know not who was responsible for the arson, but the fact that the front of the property and to the street and to the side where there is an open tennis court is still there, I would suggest that following the office recommendations, the property be rebuilt, certainly with the facade to the east, which is to the road, and to the south, which is to the other residents who can see it. We understand that buildings will not last forever, but this one, unless the heritage overlay is rescinded, the property must be rebuilt, and then the rest of it can be made to be something which is now quite habitable in the 21st century. But at present, if he is allowed, or she, whoever the owners are, to develop it in any other way, then you may as well remove all of your heritage listing that the council puts forward. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you. If you just wait for a moment. Councillors, are there any questions of this submitter tonight? There being none, you can return to the gallery. Thank you for your presentation. I now call upon Tani James.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tani James. My family previously owned 7 Mangara Road, Canterbury.
Tani, can I just ask you to
And
mention
my suburb is
Thank you.
Woodend. My family have told me not to be emotional, but it's hard not to be when your family home has been deliberately destroyed, a place that shaped you, nurtured you, and held all your joyous childhood memories. The repercussions for the destruction of 7 Mangara Road, to my mind, are totally inadequate. And even with the highest heritage listing citations, Council did not and does not have the powers to enforce upkeep, caretaking, or preservation of valuable properties which form the background of the very nature of Boroondara. The repercussions for the illegal destruction of heritage property should, to my mind, be so onerous as to make it not worth their while to destroy it. And I support all the provisions of Section 6B of the Planning and Environment Act of 1987. And I support the recommendations put forward bravely by your officers. Thank you. For the following reasons. Mangara Road was an architectural icon. It was rare and precious and unique in Boroondara, and it was not derelict when it was sold, as demonstrated by the sale photos sent to all councillors on Friday. Mangara Road had a vast connection to the community, a huge social history. It was not just beloved by our family, but by hundreds, if not thousands, of residents of Boroondara and Greater Melbourne who came to learn to dance with my mother and my sister, but also for community meetings and action groups and discussions from a very vibrant family. The Australian Children's Television Action Committee was born in the kitchen and forced commercial television networks of Australia to dedicate time to children's broadcasting. And that's just one of the small milestones that were achieved out of that house. The vigilance of the neighbours, the number of people who have contacted me on hearing the news from around the country and the world, the reaction to the news articles, and people just walking past have been horrified. And it is all testament to the influence of that place. It's not too far gone to be saved. And I think that the community expects the council to take action. This is a criminal case, but the police are going to have a very hard time to get a conviction. And without the adoption of the two proposals before you, those who deliberately burnt down my family home could get away with it scot-free. And a precedent will be set by giving a green light to anyone considering the same sort of action. I support the recommendations drawn up by your officers. I thank them for the work they've done so far and plead with you to support them. Both items 1 and 2 that they are presenting here tonight. And thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Spot on time. Councillors, are there any queries of the presenter tonight? No? Thank you very much. You can return
You know your job.
We'll now move to Dennis Smart. Mr. Smart, if you could start with your name and suburb, that'd be great. Thank you.
Dennis Smart, Canterbury.
Thank you.
That's a hard act to follow, so I'll try. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dennis Smart, and Sue and I have lived next door to number 7 for about 40 years, so we know it fairly well. I'd like to address the issue of the owner allowing the property to fall into a state of disrepair. Just simply that, we think. Since 2020, we've seen or heard from other eyewitnesses that some of the following situations. No substantial security, so there were no doors so there were doors and windows left open to the elements. Front fences and gates have not been secured. Slates not replaced on the roof, letting water damage in, and the ceilings inside therefore falling in. vandals taking light fittings, towel rails, door furniture. Reportedly, a homeless person living there for some time. When the studio at the rear was being removed, they found a fox was living in the main house. We saw lots of evidence of kids in there eating pizzas, drink, not alcoholic I don't think, but just drink, just enjoying it, and that went on for several months. And during this time, we have been frustrated when we contact the council to get a response. It seems that it's very difficult for the officers to use any of the existing laws to do anything about it, unless there's people living there or animals living there. It seems to be a problem. So very frustrating. We can't get any. We couldn't get any change to that. So if any one of the above examples happened in your neighbourhood, I believe you'd be concerned. But when the collection of all of them added up, it seemed like neglect, intentional or otherwise, that has allowed the property to fall into a state of disrepair. And I think that's the key to what the office is trying to achieve. I'd quickly like to also add that on the afternoon of the fire, Melbourne had very strong winds. By the time the fire had finished, it was very calm, allowing the flames and the firefighters to be controlled quickly. They were fantastic. We were very lucky. No one was hurt. If the fire got out of control, it could have been very, very different. If the damage to other properties happens in future, who pays for this potentially significant bill? The heritage listed owner, the neighbours themselves, the arsonist, the relevant authorities who may have unwittingly created the situation.
Thank you, Mr. Smart. I'll have to get you to wrap up now. Thanks very much.
Please consider these issues in your current and future decisions. Thank you for your time.
Councillors, Councillor Thompson, you've got a question.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Smart. Just to confirm the officer's recommendation, are you in support?
I'm sorry, that was on the paper, I didn't get to it. We certainly support the recommendation.
Thank you.
There's no further questions from the horseshoe table. If you can return to the gallery, thank you for your presentation. I'll now call upon the next presenter, Christina Brannigan, if you just come forward.
Good evening. My name is Christina Brannigan. I live in Camberwell. Could I have the slides, please? Thank you. Good evening, councillors and everybody. I know Mangara Road very well. I'm speaking tonight both as a local resident but also as a member of the community group Burundara Heritage Group. I very much support the officer's recommendations and I really thank council for bravely considering taking on this challenge. We think it's really important that council and the community do pursue this course, and everybody I've spoken to seems to feel the same way locally. It seems as though this is a kind of a test case of sorts and could potentially this example could set a disturbing precedent, effectively putting all other heritage houses at our streets at risk. I think that's how a lot of people feel, those of us who live in heritage streets. So if the house isn't rebuilt, it really is a bit of a worrying precedent. I wanted to show council too that residents are aware, as I'm sure some of you who live locally are too, that there are several neglected heritage places, and this is not a lone example of a place potentially being demolished by neglect. So there are just a couple of examples here on the slides. So this first one is a place in Kew that I understand had an application to demolish refuse in 2013. It's an individually significant house. And the next slide, please, is a house in Hawthorne. And similarly, that's an individually significant house. I understand that at some time last year, there were some authorised works commenced and some sort of stop order was placed on it. The next slide are contributory grade houses in the same precinct in Camberwell. So we can see that there are plenty of places that are being left to demolish by neglect. So it's really important that we act in this example, we think. So you do have to wonder, I think, where it's going to end, whether some owners might be looking at this case of Bangara and looking quite closely to see what council and other authorities are going to do, and to see whether we're really going to demonstrate to people that the council and other authorities really have the willpower to protect the community, because that's actually what we're talking about now, potentially. Protect the community and our shared cultural heritage of Victoria. So I really think the council's powers need to be strengthened, and I hope that that's something we could advocate for too. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any queries of this presenter tonight? There are none. Thank you very much for your presentation. Can I now call upon Nerida Muirden to come forward? And I'm sure Mrs. Muirden, you know it's not a repetitious thing tonight, but I'm sure you've separated your presentations.
Yes, hi. My name is Nerida Muirden and I live in Camberwell. Hello councillors and officers, thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight. I support the officers' recommendation and thank them for their work on this. Many people in the community have been keeping an eye on the house for some time, concerned that it was potentially at risk of demolition by neglect. I too have noticed the decline of the house over the past few years since it was sold, and that it was vacant and not maintained. You could see holes in the roof where the slate tiles had slipped, allowing the outside elements to come in. Council officers have been made aware of this neglect on numerous occasions by the community, and I know a site inspection was done. Also, people posted messages on planning alerts showing their concern that the house had been sadly left to rot and not the condition it once was. I hope that Council has enough evidence from the community that they pursue demolition by neglect and will see this through. My daughters went to Canterbury Girls, just nearby in Mangara Road, and I have long admired this magnificent house over the years for its beautiful and unusual architecture, and know the dance school was popular with the local school kids. And just one more thing, I just want to say, Council should know that everyone has been really shocked by the fire at the house. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillors, any questions? None? Thank you very much for your presentation. Can I now call upon Neil Rooney to come forward?
How are you all tonight? My name is Neil Roney. I come from East Hawthorn. I've been in East Hawthorn for 42 years. I speak tonight as a passionate heritage so-called nut. I absolutely love Burundurra. It's a wonderful suburb to live in, and I'm absolutely shocked to see what's happened to this building. My daughters actually went to Canterbury Girls, so I've watched this building over many years. It's just a beautiful example of carpentry. I'm a carpentry teacher at one of the TAFEs, one of the most prominent TAFEs in Melbourne, although tonight I'm here as a private person, just devastated by what's happened with this building. I would like everybody to be well and truly aware that even though the majority of the building has been burnt, this building was built with old growth timbers, and the facades that are still gratefully intact can certainly be saved. I look at so many modern buildings that are being built in heritage areas, and facades are everything, even though the majority of the building has been burnt. I'm a little bit underprepared tonight. I've just had a hip replacement 2 weeks ago. So I've basically just so passionate about trying to save what's left of this building. So I'd like you all to please support the proposal and let's save it and make sure that this type of destruction doesn't happen to other heritage buildings in Burundara. We live in an absolute beautiful, beautiful community. Thank you.
Mr. Bruni, councillors, do you have any queries of this presenter tonight? There are none. Thank you again for your presentation.
Can I just add one last point? I don't think I'm over time, am I?
You're well and truly inside time, yeah, but if you'd just be brief.
I did a building maintenance, heritage maintenance course in London, and with an organisation called the Society of the Protection of Ancient Buildings. There is no way known that this building would be demolished if it was in London. So why can't we respect our buildings the same as the English respect theirs?
Thank you for that.
I wanted to ask a question, but
My apologies. Did you? I now call upon Greg Deacon.
Greg Deacon from Broadway, Camberwell. I fully support the resolution, though one has to wonder whether it's a case of trying to catch the horse after the horse has bolted. I think this just draws attention to the broader issue of is there any adequate monitoring of our stock of significant buildings in Burundara? I'd just like to draw attention to another example, that of 851 Burke Road, which is the former State Savings Bank, which has been subject to development applications and controversy over the last 10 or 12 years. Finally, after 3 VCAT appeals, the construction of apartments incorporating the State Bank was approved in December 2020, over 3 years ago, and there's still no indication of work proceeding. In the meantime, there's been wanton neglect of the heritage building. Windows have been left open. There's been obvious deterioration of the facade of the building. And I just wonder, what sort of procedures does the council have at its discretion to monitor and enforce basic maintenance standards for significant buildings? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deacon. Questions? There are none. Thank you very much again. That's it. We will now return to the officers for any relevant comments following those presentations.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I'd like to thank all the speakers tonight for their support. Thank you for coming out this evening. Just to address, I think it was Mr. Deacon's question about what procedures council may have in relation to monitoring properties that may be in disrepair. We have limited power under the Planning and Environment Act, which I think has been made clear in terms of requiring maintenance and repair. I do know that local lawyers, in particular with 7 Mangara, did attend the site on numerous occasions in response to resident complaints, but ultimately it is limited power. But I must say, since 7 Mangara, and depending on the outcome of this procedure, with DTP. You know, we will look, depending on the success of this, we'll look at what we can do going forward.
Thank you very much. Councillors, are there any questions of officers? Councillor Franco, is your late question appropriate to an officer?
My question was to the speaker, but I do have a question for officers regardless, so it's very timely of you. Thank you, Chair. In relation to the proposed recommendation or the officer's recommendation, could officers clarify if the wording of what we're proposing makes it abundantly clear that any reconstruction will require the reuse of existing materials? And I had in mind, you know, the comments of the last speaker, Mr. Neil Rooney, who referred to the quality of some of the materials and the possibility that they could be retained. So that was the question that I was going to ask of him, but it relates more importantly really for the officers to clarify that point. And in asking this question, I have in mind one of the motives for the introduction of 6B, which was that destruction of the Irish Hotel in Carlton, and the proposed reconstruction there would not, I presume, involve any of the previously existing materials because it was turned into a park. And so could you clarify, would that require, or could, under this proposal, could we see the eradication of everything on the site and potential, if it were to be approved, a new reconstruction? Thank you.
Sharif?
Through yourself, Chair, I might answer that question. Certainly, the Corkman Hotel situation was the precursor to these sorts of rules coming into the Planning and Environment Act, and that was a slightly different situation in that it was the total demolition of the building and removal of all materials. In this case, we have a scenario where there is substantial materials on site. There is a damaged building, but there are substantial components of that building that remain. And the way that we intend to structure the incorporated document and relevant specific controls that would attach to this particular provision would require the input and advice of relevant heritage experts and architects and engineers, with an intention of using as much of the existing building and materials as possible. So that absolutely would be a fundamental starting point for any of the controls that we construct around this property in terms of retaining and repairing and restoring a dwelling on the site.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. I have two questions. Wondering if, in light of the written submission received from the organisation or submitter acting on behalf of the property owner, the Wang Corporation Australia, wondering if officers have been able to engage with the property owner to date. There's various assertions in this document that's been circulated here.
Until we received this afternoon, this late submission, we have been unable to make contact with the owner. We did attempt to just after the fire, and then about a week ago received the first phone call from a representative of the property owner. And that was already after we had sent the letter of intent to the department after trying to contact the owner.
Thank you. And my second question, whilst foreshadowing a motion, is in relation to the officer's recommendation on the screen, and I'm wondering if officers see any complicating factor or unintended consequence in referring to the property of 7 Mangara Road in its various iterations. I'm concerned that it's listed on our searchable heritage overlay map on the internet as 9 Mangara. It's listed in this document as 7 Mangara. The citation is 7 to 9 Mangara. It was formerly known as 5 Mangara. And I just don't want there to be a loophole created or perceived for any such property owner, or in any way for us to set the minister up for anything other than success.
Thanks, Chair. We do need to be specific and ensure that we are correct and accurate in referencing the address. The property has had various iterations in terms of being separate properties that were referenced in a collective of 7 to 9 Mangara. It is now a consolidated property, and so on the current council database and property system, it is clearly and definitely referred to and known as 7 Mangara. So that is a correct reference and fully accurate as of today.
I might, as a follow-up question, if I may, Chair, in front of me here on our website, it's 9 Mangara, where the citation is found on the map. So I would appreciate the construction of a postscript or similar in this motion that has reference to the other ways the property has been cited.
Noted.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, we will certainly follow up and get that clarified.
That exhausts your questions, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Park.
Thank you, Chair. I was hoping there could be some more specificity around paragraph 2. The document that's referred to, perhaps if I go firstly to paragraph 1, the incorporated document that's referred to, is there a draft of that document?
Through yourself, Chair, since finalising this report and writing to the Minister, officers have been seeking legal advice and input in preparing a suitable incorporated document. So that's a work in progress, which will then be worked up with officers of the Department of Transport and Planning.
I see a query still in your face, Councillor.
Oh, well, I'm not sure how that gives satisfaction to councillors that what's put forward will be what we would anticipate. I mean, given that it's a request by council to the minister, it seems to me that it's important that we actually understand the specifics of what's being sought. What's the time frame on that advice being available, and is there any reason why we couldn't have a more fulsome report prior to the formal request to the minister?
Through yourself, Chair, and perhaps that's where there is reference in point 2, which endeavours to put a little bit more clarity around what the intent behind the council request is. And what that is referencing is the reconstruction of the heritage building as an important component of any future planning controls on the property. And the reason why the recommendation is constructed the way that it is because this is in many ways, a test case. This is the first time that this sort of control has been pursued. And the initial advice from the Department of Transport and Planning is not 100% clear. So we have been in discussions with them. The final form of what the incorporated document would look like under option 1, which is a ministerial planning scheme amendment, or potentially a council planning scheme amendment, and we're still not sure which avenue the department will want to support or pursue, is still a work in progress. So whilst we could specify some further detail as we currently have a draft incorporated document, that may well change after further discussions with the department.
But with the greatest respect, I mean, there's nothing in 2 that really goes anywhere. You could simply have referenced section 6B, which would have had the same effect. I'm just trying to understand what's the urgency. Is there something I'm missing? Is there a reason why it must be dealt with ahead of having received the legal advice and council being in a position to frame its request with greater specificity?
Again, through yourself, Chair, the urgency in this matter relates to what the planning scheme amendment will do. And what it does is set up a framework that prevents particular actions by the landowner to pursue a demolition of the dwelling as destroyed under the current planning framework. Now, there is a risk that an application for planning permit to demolish that building is lodged by the owner. That application will need to be considered under the planning framework as it stands now. The current form of that building, its level of destruction, will be a relevant consideration as to whether a planning permit ultimately is issued for the demolition. So is this a building that is in a form that can be retained and can be kept, will be absolutely relevant consideration. Now, there's a risk that a planning permit ultimately is issued for demolition and the building is demolished. And that's the risk from a timing point of view. That means that it's very important and prudent on council to proceed with some immediacy to seek this sort of control that changes the planning framework and context for that property. Because they are very, very different considerations. Once we have a control here that is specifically aimed at dealing with situations like this, where a building has been destroyed or damaged. The current planning controls that simply say a planning permit is needed for demolition of an existing heritage building don't deal with this circumstance very well. In fact, they would almost suggest that a planning permit for demolition can and should be issued in many situations.
So clearly paragraph 2 is contemplating a further approach, from what I'm hearing, to the Minister with further detail. Why is it that that couldn't come back to a meeting of this committee?
Again, through yourself, Chair, it could. It's simply a matter of timing, because we are in a position where we feel we need to proceed with immediacy, and there is opportunity to provide the authority for myself as Director to proceed on advice back from the department to shape this planning scheme amendment in a form that enables us to move with that immediacy, rather than spending time relisting a report to council and seeking those decisions. It is possible to do that, it just will take more time. It is possible to provide regular updates back to council along the way and confirm with council that they are comfortable with the direction that's being pursued.
Thank you. Are you prepared to move forward on that basis at this point in time, Councillor?
No, I'll address the rest in debate. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Thompson, I'm sorry, the lights went on and off and the order adjusted itself. We call upon you now to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got 4 questions approximately for the officers through you, Chair. Has it been confirmed that it is arson or suspected arson?
Through you, Chair, it's been confirmed by Victoria Police that it is arson.
Thank you. That's the first one. I think that's quite critical if we're going to go down this line. The second one is interpreting how this mechanism works within the planning scheme. Will a heritage overlay still be applicable to this in its final form, or will the new document afford the same heritage values and protections that a heritage overlay would?
So the SCO would be applied to the site where there's anything contrary, any requirements contrary to the zone or the existing heritage overlay. The incorporated document would, like for example, prevent a permit being issued for anything other than what's been approved in the incorporated document. The HO would still remain on that site. So the heritage value is still retained on that site.
So the things that would have been reflected in the heritage citation for this property, we would see embodied in a new dwelling. So in other words, we're not going to see a faux Mangara Road. It'll be something that reflects the quality of what was originally there.
That's what we would be hoping for in drafting the incorporated document.
Wonderful, thank you. Obviously, through you, Chair, to Mr Walker again, the communication and discussion with Councillor Park. I guess our other mechanisms, this is new to us, this path. It's obviously being tested. We don't have the ability of things like interim heritage protection, which gave us an affordancy of time. In this instance, we're trying to find the equivalent mechanism of that to be able to allow us to start that process. Is that correct?
Again, through yourself, Chair, in some ways, yes. It's not quite the same. There won't be, if a ministerial amendment is issued in this circumstance, there won't be a subsequent process of permanent exhibition, planning scheme, panel hearings and the like. Yep. So it is slightly different, but it certainly is akin to an interim control because of the urgency behind it.
So to that end, at what point can that interim control come in to affect protection of the site, and assuming it's possibly still a crime scene, so no one's maybe allowed on it, to the point where it's actually incorporated into our local planning scheme? What's that time duration?
Again, through yourself, Chair, and that's a matter for the Minister for Planning. If the Minister agrees and supports the council position, if the council pursues the recommendation as put, then that is a matter for timing by the Minister. It could be a matter of weeks, probably more likely to be a matter of months, but we wouldn't want it to be any longer than that.
So to that end, again, can officers turn their mind to communicating that interim protection works need to be considered so that this building's no longer structurally safe? It hasn't got the supports to actually keep it in its current format for very long. So the worst case scenarios, we don't want it to deteriorate any further.
And again, through yourself, Chair, and if I perhaps just touch on that, that those issues are being pursued separately through Council's Municipal Building Surveyor, with relevant engineers providing advice on the building. So those certain safety and structural issues to maintain or retain the building are being pursued separately.
And last one, just of note, one of our presenters spoke about the UK. The UK does do it far better in heritage protection than Victoria, well and truly, or Australia. There is a Heritage at Risk program which lists properties that are in a state of disrepair, heading towards dilapidation, if not demolition. It would be good for us as a council, I believe, to actually form that document. We've seen some examples of that tonight. So should this case actually be successful, that we can actually go forward to protect those properties before they find themselves in this same position.
That completes your questions, Councillor Thompson. Thank you very much. Councillor Bigger.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to clarify, because obviously this isn't the kind of case we've had before. In any previous, like the report and consent for partial demolition of the dwelling and demolition of outbuildings and dismantling, which was in the timeline, that's from June 2023. So I presume those works didn't take place, or did they take place?
So there was a planning permit issued for basically the demolition or removal, I should say, of the ballroom and other outbuildings. And that was approved and the works completed. A subsequent planning permit application was lodged for further partial demolition and construction of 2 dwellings to the rear of the heritage building, and that application lapsed. So it's no longer an active application. There was a request for further information and the deadline wasn't met.
So, so just for clarification, so there's no outstanding permits attached to this, or?
That's right.
Okay, and then just a quick follow-up on Councillor Sinfield's question about when you said that officers had never heard anything from the owner until this week. Presumably that doesn't include any responses to past. Obviously, we've contacted this owner many times over the last few years. Has there been no response over that whole period of time in terms of the requests for securing the property and so on?
So my understanding is that over the last few years, local laws have attended to complaints from the community and reached out to the owner I'm unsure whether they've had success in actually speaking to the owner or through a representative, but since the fire, so for clarity, since the fire, we've not been able to make contact, yes, until recently.
Thank you very much, that's helpful.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'm just seeking clarity on why you've recommended that we request the Minister for Planning to prepare a planning scheme amendment for this site when would not just a request to the Minister under Section 6B of the Act suffice? It just feels to me like it's a sledgehammer when only a regular hammer is required. Now, if there's a long answer that goes with this, maybe this is something that could be done, advice in another place, but I don't understand why we're taking this approach.
Thanks, Chair. Again, the right approach to this situation and this sort of matter is something that has been discussed with officers of the Department of Transport and Planning. And how we've framed this in terms of asking the Minister for Planning to prepare a planning scheme amendment for the property is the most expeditious way forward and would be the most straightforward way of achieving the outcome, presuming that the Minister supports that outcome. And certainly our initial discussions with officers of the department indicate that they are supportive of it. It is the most direct route to deliver on what the expectations would be under 6B of the Planning and Environment Act.
Okay, thank you very much.
That appears to have exhausted the questions around the table. Councillor Sinfield, earlier you indicated or foreshadowed a motion. Are you still in a position to put a motion?
I am, thank you, and I've sent something through to officers with a couple of very minor changes, and I'll talk through that once it's on the screen, with your indulgence. Are you happy for me to speak to that, Chair?
We might seek a seconder first. Have we got a seconder for this motion? We have a name on the screen. Councillor Addis, are you prepared to second that motion as it appears?
Yes, I think that makes perfect sense. Thank you.
To assist the mover again, is there any opposition to the motion as it's on the screen? None?
Well, I'm reading the motion, sorry.
Please, okay, we'll have a sec.
To assist colleagues, Chair, it's become a four-part motion because what was originally part 2 has been split in half, just to make it a little easier to read, and point 4 is the only substantive addition.
Through you, have we got a seconder on this as yet? We have. Oh, we in debate?
No, we just...
With your indulgence, Chair, can I, as I did in the previous one, can I ask the impact of item 4 from the officers?
We're currently in the point of seeking whether there's opposition, and there's been questions asked in relation to that. I guess we could entertain other questions at this point in time, so we're clear on the motion that's before us.
Would you like me to repeat that question?
Please.
Thank you. Just through you to the officers, what's the impact of item 4 in relation to timing and protection of this property?
Mr. Walker, would you like to respond to that?
Thanks, Chair. There's probably a couple of different scenarios that might play out because at face value, the Minister for Planning has the right to pursue a planning scheme amendment and prepare the relevant planning scheme controls and in fact prepare an incorporated document on their own accord. In fact, it doesn't even need a request from the Council. The request from the Council is actually asking the Minister to go about preparing such a document. That will be something that Council officers are pursuing and preparing as a draft to put forward. And in all likelihood, that version will be one that is potentially taken up. But they're not obliged, the Minister's not obliged to. So we may be in a scenario ultimately where the Minister approves an incorporated document that is not the version that we agree with. And what that will mean for item 4 in that scenario is that we simply report after the event what the final incorporated document looks like. If ultimately it is Council that puts forward that document, then again, we would need to put this to a UPDC meeting as quickly as possible as a matter of course.
No further questions.
Mr. Chair, I wonder if I could just add to that, if I could, please.
Please do.
Thank you. The context of the question is councillors would like to see what the proposed control document is going to be. And to that extent, we will have an opinion about what it should be. So what's being asked of us is that once we form that opinion, we bring that to council for consideration. I don't believe that should have any impact on timing. We need to design the document. We need to be able to express a view to the Minister. Whether the Minister takes up that option or not is a matter for the Minister. But council needs to be confident about the position we're taking forward. So I think that we can make this request to the Minister. At the same time, we can refine our position on the control document and bring that to you as soon as possible.
Thank you. Councillor Franco.
Yes, I have a question. It follows directly from our Chief Executive Officer's comments. I think the Chief Executive Officer summed up very clearly what the intent is around the room, but I wonder whether Clause 4 actually reflects that, because upon completion of a control document, to me, as one person reads, when it's been completed and by the Minister. So this is after the event. So that's how I read point 4. I'll just make that point. I presume that's not what Councillor Sinfield intended.
If you could respond to that, that'd be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps the second word in paragraph 4 should be preparation. Would that more adequately achieve the outcome?
If you would.
Chair, that's fine, and we clearly understand the intent, which is council receives a final version or a draft version of that control document before it is finalised through the planning scheme amendment process.
Could I return to you, Councillor Sinfield? Are you happy with the motion now as it stands, as your motion going forward?
I am, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Addis, are you happy to second that motion?
Yes, but I just want to make absolutely certain, and I think it's what our CEO said, that this will in no way delay the process of protecting this property in any way we can. These will sort of run concurrently. I'm thinking that it still goes in as quickly as possible.
As a point of clarification, could I seek an answer to that? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, it would be concurrent. So the request, in fact, has already been submitted to the Department of Transport and Planning as our intent, and they are certainly starting work and have started work on that. We will now put forward a formal request upon this resolution if this is what is resolved, and concurrently continue working on that control plan and bring that back as soon as possible back to the UPDC.
Very happy to second that.
That would then.
Thank you.
Thank you. I shall return to the question asked a while ago to assist the mover. Is there anyone opposed? No. Thank you. Councillor Sinfield, do you want to speak to that motion?
Thank you, I would. Shenley Croft was a magnificent property in the Golden Mile precinct of Canterbury. As we've heard from our community, it was surrounded by established gardens on a particularly large allotment of over 1,300 square metres at 7 to 9 Mangara Road in Canterbury. The arts and crafts inspired landmark Edwardian villa with a slate roof was designed by eminent architect John Edmund Burke and built in 1905 and 6. The beautiful, timeless profile of compelling heritage character with 3.6 metre ceilings, polished timber accents and flowing French doors, this property was a standout in the area, bringing real charm to the southern end of Mangara Road, enjoyed by neighbours near and far. Due to the circumstances that I won't go into, the property was extensively damaged but not destroyed by fire on the 9th of December 2023. Tonight, I commend the motion on the screen to my colleagues as a motion that seeks to respect the individually significant heritage dwelling Shenley Croft, protected by Heritage Overlay 391 since 2009, through a request of the Minister for Planning to amend the Boroondara planning scheme to apply a specific control overlay. The SCO will seek to ensure any future development on the site includes the reconstruction of the heritage building. This instrument, Section 6B of the Planning and Environment Act, is available to the Minister largely as a result of the destruction of the Corkman Hotel in 2016, as we heard earlier, and is designed to act as a deterrent. I hope I have the support of the Delegated Committee tonight to seek the support of the Minister to send a really strong message that the fabric of our city is worth protecting, worth preserving and worth reinstating so that we can continue to be the most livable city in Victoria. I thank the officers for their actions that they have taken to address this loss of heritage, for their research and diligence in bringing to us a strategy that has not previously been tested in Victoria. And I encourage my colleagues to unanimously support this motion in an endeavour to leverage the Minister's powers to restore 7 Mangara Road in Canterbury. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Addis, do you wish to add to that? Do you wish to speak?
Just briefly, thanks, Chair. Really to echo what a special and charming and unusual house this is. And it is a great shame to, I suspect that what it means is that people who don't love heritage ended up purchasing this property, and that does seem a great shame that such a special house noted as significant. It would have been bought with that knowledge. And I do agree that it's really important to send a strong message about the importance of the custodial role you have when you purchase one of these properties. So yes, thank you to the officers, and we certainly look forward to what we hope is a positive outcome to be able to continue to support heritage in Boroondara. Thank you.
Thank you. This is not opposed, but our Mayor, Councillor Hollingsworth, has sought the right to make a comment as well, and I will accept that.
Thank you, Chair, and with your indulgence, I'll be very brief. I just wanted to thank Councillor Sinfield and Councillor Addis for their words of support of this. This property is incredibly important to our community, and as a fifth-generation Boroondara resident, it's a property that was close to where my grandparents lived, my parents lived. My mother went to Mangara School, which then later became the Canterbury Girls Secondary School. And through the generations, it's a house that we have walked past repeatedly and admired and loved for its uniqueness and its intactness. And to see that it has stood the test of time, it is a testament to its prior owners. I'm just so pleased that this has come before the Chamber. I thank the officers, I thank the community for their advocacy in bringing additional information to us about the significance of this home. And I also appeal to the Honourable Sonia Kilkenny. The Planning Practice Note 95 that was developed in May 2022 was clearly designed with the intent to protect properties of this very nature. Section 6B of the PE Act talks about the need for deterring persons from unlawfully demolishing heritage homes and allowing heritage homes to fall into disrepair. Now, regardless of the circumstances of what led to the arson attack, the house, the front facade, the chimney stack, it is all still intact, albeit it needs to be resurrected, it needs reconstruction, but it is achievable. And I thank Mr Neil Rennie for his comments talking about properties that he is aware of that have been at this condition and salvaged. And from my own experience, being a part of a construction company, our own company has worked on a home that was the victim of arson attack and it was resurrected. I know the materials are available, I know it can be done, and I thank Councillor Sinfield and Addis again for putting forward this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. It appears we've exhausted debate. I will now put this motion. All of those in favour? I'll ask for some in the gallery as well. Anybody against? The motion is carried. Councillors, are we happy to move on to item 3.3? There's no need for a quick rest stop or anything. Thank you. Item 3.3, Markham Avenue, Ashburton, Markham Estate. Review of planning approval and development process. The officers' report tonight will be presented by Scott Walker, Director Urban Planning, and Erin McCarthy, Coordinator Urban Planning. Please proceed.
Thanks, Chair. Happy to provide some commentary to introduce this particular report. The report this evening is presented in the context of planning reforms which have been introduced over recent years, along with further reforms being put in place as part of the Victorian Housing Statement from September last year. The report outlines significant concerns and issues with the state government process to approve and develop the Markham Estate housing project as facilitated by Amendment C321 to the Boroondara Planning Scheme. It does not raise concern with the provision of public housing, and in fact, the background to the report identifies that additional public housing was ultimately provided as part of the project following council and community influence. Following a number of failed state government efforts to amend the Boroondara Planning Scheme after the project was first announced in 2015, the Planning Scheme Amendment C321 was ultimately approved by the Minister for Planning on 24th of September 2020. And the amendment inserted what's known as the Markham Housing Estate Incorporated document, dated May 2020, into the planning scheme to facilitate the redevelopment that included 178 dwellings, 111 of those public housing dwellings. The project was then subsequently completed by Homes Victoria in late 2023, and residents have now moved in. The report addresses a number of key process issues, which includes that the planning framework to facilitate this redevelopment was approved without formal opportunity for council and community input or an independent panel review to evaluate the proposal, and that would be a normal expectation for projects that involve an amendment to the planning scheme. The Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, DELWP as they were then known, on behalf of the Minister for Planning, as the responsible authority for approval of the documentation, did not have a transparent process for involving formal consultation or external scrutiny over the final approvals. The Minister for Planning, as the responsible authority, has wide-ranging power to agree to proposals put forward by Homes Victoria, who had the responsibility for delivery, and there was no clear enforcement oversight of the project to ensure that it met with the approvals that were ultimately put in place, and that many of those approvals were changed throughout the process, again with limited scrutiny. The report outlines that the process is effectively a closed loop, you might call it, in which the Minister and state government agencies established the rules, issued the approvals and monitored delivery with little to no independent oversight. So whilst the Ashburton Resident Action Group took the matter to the Victorian Civil Administrative Tribunal, they found it difficult to mount a case given that the framework that had been established had created that internal closed-loop process. In the view of the officers, it's considered that the process has been established is not a streamlined, timely process. It did not lead to better outcomes in itself. That requires significant resource, effort on behalf of council and the community to ultimately influence improvements in the outcome. And in our view, this is another example of what we'd call a flawed, streamlined process that should not be relied upon as part of the new planning reforms for delivery of housing frameworks, housing projects.
Ms McCarthy, are you adding to this or you're not? Thank you. All right, tonight we have 4 people that have indicated they wish to speak to this. 1 is against the proposal tonight and 3 support it. Once I've announced your name, please come forward to the horseshoe table. If a submitter is not present, I will move on, as I've said before. Again, I'll remind you of the 3-minute limit, and I'd also ask you to commence your presentation with your name and suburb. The first speaker tonight will be Maria Sampay. My apologies, I've pronounced that incorrectly. If you'd please come forward.
Oops. Good evening, councillors and officers. First of all, could I just make a correction? It's not that I'm against it. I totally agree with it. It's just that I felt that the officer's recommendation didn't have an outcome. So I was just wondering whether it's at all possible, because the second paragraph states it had no defined pathway, lacked transparency, forced council and the community to advocate for improvements, etc. I was just wondering whether, if at all, a councillor can foreshadow for a letter to be written to the by the Mayor on behalf of the council and the residents to the Minister for Planning, protesting strongly about the manner this project was carried out and completely ignoring council and community concerns about the project, or something along those lines. Maybe consult with some of the residents on what to put in it, because they were really treated, you know, really badly. So The other thing that I'd like to raise...
Maria, we don't want to, we encourage you not to go back into history too much. If you just make your points clearly, that'd be appreciated.
Oh, okay. Well...
I'm sorry to disturb your flow.
Yeah. Well, basically, we moved into the area in the middle of last year, so I've only come into this just now. But basically, we've got an open drain at the back of our house, which is causing flooding. There's a lot of issues with one of the main objectors, has been dealing with it. But there's still so many things, the way that the your council has a policy that if you want to remove trees or anything to that effect, that you've got to get a permit. Yet this developer managed to get rid of all the trees, and not only that, destroyed people's fences. And our fence was destroyed as well because it fell over back in September, and it took about 4 months dealing with the department before they did anything, and then I had to take it into my own hands. And when it fell over, you could see that the digger had destroyed the base of the fence when they were removing the trees. There's a lot of other things that, I'm now stressed. I've just never, I've never known that, the Minister for Planning just basically took it over and didn't listen to the residents, and it's just the way that it was
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Sampe.
Yeah.
We generally get the message. Thank you very much for your presentation tonight. Could you just remain in your seat for a moment? There may be some questions from the councillors. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. I did turn my light on and off, so I apologise for that. Ms. Sampati, thank you for your presentation. I know it's not easy to come and sit in front of the horseshoe table and speak for 3 minutes, and I think you expressed your concerns very well. My question is with regard to your damaged fence and other damage to your property. Did you eventually receive compensation, or is that still pending?
No, we had to pay for it. We had, there wasn't any compensation. And, I had to involve the member, Matt Freegan, to deal with this because to deal with that department, you ring them up, you've got to press all these numbers, you speak to somebody, then that person goes on holidays, they don't get back to you, then you ring again, and then you're speaking to somebody else, and then he goes on holidays. I had 4 months of this, and it's all documented if you want to. It was just horrible, and eventually they didn't even give me a quote. I had to get my own quote. They gave the next door neighbour, because their fence was damaged as well, a quote for $4,400, and they got this contractor from Warragul, and I got my own fencer, and it was $2,200. So then we just paid the half, $1,100. But it just goes to show how, dealing with them was just very stressful.
Thank you for your comments.
Look, if I could just ask if you could send an email to Burundara and just attention it to the Mayor and the Ward Councillor, and happy to have a chat to it later. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. No
Thank
problem.
you. There aren't any further questions. Thank you for your presentation. I'll now call upon Mr. Peter Fellows to join us at the table.
Hello, Peter Fellows from Ashburton. I'm on the Ashburton Residents Action Group, and for many years was on the committee of the Action Group. And this is a good opportunity to both support the document, but also to thank Council for its incredibly professional and committed work on this, and in particular, the work that Gary has done. This is an opportunity to get a couple of things off my chest. I hope I won't run out of the 3 minutes. But it's rather sobering that the proposal back in 2015 involved 70% of the land being sold off to private developers, with the proceeds going to rebuilding public housing on the remaining 30%, plus a financial return to the state. It was terribly short-sighted and shows what can result from incomplete community consultation and presentation of proposals. It's taken nearly 9 years to get to this point. In my opinion, the slowness or the lack of pace of this has got nothing to do with ARAG's activities. Contrary to what the state government has tried to claim to support their development model, the significant delays were all theirs, and a lot of them people, including me, have been there through that torturous process. It's a concern that the state government is taking such an anti-democratic authoritarian approach towards control of decision-making powers and all interactions with interested parties. Still, I suppose this is in keeping with a worldwide trend towards authoritarian governments. Government strategy on ARAG. Over the many years that we've been doing this, testing the stamina of our little group to the maximum possible, it has become clear that the government strategy for us was overwhelming silence and non-response, except occasionally when it couldn't be avoided, and then usually very simplistic. It is our opinion that at no stage was ARAG unreasonable in what it sought or how it wanted to interact with what questions would be likely to be answered. In all those years, we managed not to get a meeting with the Minister for Housing, anybody in the Minister's office, the head of housing, the next level down in housing, and you have to keep on going down until you get some community consultation people towards the end of the spectrum of years. Finally, you don't get really well-attended protest marches in High Street, Ashburton on a Saturday unless there are many people with a passionate concern about what was going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fellows. There are no questions, I believe, so you can return to the gallery. Thank you. Can I now call upon Mr. Ian Porter to join us?
Don't worry, I'm not presenting that much. Ian Porter, 103 Ashburn Grove, Vice President of ARAG and the representative that went against the Minister in Homes Victoria at VCAT. And, okay. Thanks again to Birundara for taking on this report. We strongly endorse the report, but request that we be given time to talk to Scott and others so that they fully understand the issues that were not accepted at VCAT. We've said that 500 residents marched down High Street many years ago, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, but there were 4,000 pages put forward to VCAT. We put forward 800 pages of fact. They were all ignored, and in the hearing that's come out and the panel's outcomes, none of those are tested because a minister who worked within their own office or signed off, and all those facts become irrelevant. It has huge issues for future planning in Victoria. It means stories have been omitted from documents, dimensions omitted from documents, and they can do it by a sign-off, and it means nothing. And we presented that, and it meant nothing. So what we would like is that the review of the VCAT ARAG documents that we've got, not exhaustively through the 800 pages with Scott, that we go through those and we highlight what was incorrect and what was a farce and a sham, and why the community facts, pictures, videos of fact that were real were ignored completely. We had no hierarchy. We had no input. We had no say. Our emails meant nothing. Our photos meant nothing. And they were not responded to. We then asked to review the impact of the minister's sign-off on the future planning in Victoria. If a minister can ignore a story being above 1.2 metres, then we can do that in our domestic houses as well. We can build 10 stories of car park under a building that's 2 stories high and conform to what is required. That's what the minister did. The minister signed off on documents that stated stories, nothing about what was in the incorporated document of preferred residential stories. That was in their documents. It wasn't even read, it was just signed off. It was obvious that the DELP office had no idea what was being put forward either. So other breaches. There was no transitions between NRZ and GRZ zones that was a requirement of the C321 that was eventually passed through COVID by Ambrosi signing off for Minister Wynne. We had no say. There was a whole list of breaches that went on that I hope you can bear with me to give me time to just mention a few. There were breaches in TPZs. There was sediment runoff into houses, our own house, that they denied happened.
Mr. Porter, we really
Yes,
are out of time, but I understand. Maybe you can take those up separately with the
Exactly.
officers.
So what I feel is if we can get in the review that we have further consultation, we can bring out some of these facts that were omitted and then amend and make sure the minister is aware of these and then amend the plans to suit.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Questions from councillors. Councillor Addis.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Mr. Porter. I just am seeking clarification that you're happy with the motion on the screen. It's just that as a separate process, you would like to meet with...
To increase the recommendations to include some other issues.
So you'd want that...
Wording improved, yes.
If I may do a follow-up question, I think there's benefit for Mr. Porter and Mr. Walker to actually meet, because Mr. Walker spent time over the Christmas period reading through the report, and obviously Mr. Porter actually has a lot of first-hand information that could be imparted. That might be an opportunity.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Porter, for your presentation.
I'm sorry, Chair. Just one question. Mr. Porter, obviously you abut the property, or just to the southern portion of the property. How many residents that do abut the property along Ashburn Grove have departed?
Okay. There's 11 properties that abut the western edge, and 35% of those have left.
And through the whole process, which has been obviously 7 years for your involvement with ARAG, have you been led to believe that the state will consult and take on board comments from the community at any point?
Zero.
But was that the initial understanding that they would?
Absolutely. That was the whole process, and that's what was written into this process, that they had community consultation, even at VCAT. It wasn't consultation, it was telling us what they were going to do. There was no consultation.
And one final question. Obviously, you've spent a lot of time toiling over plans being directly affected by this development. You found errors on the drawings, which have then been subsequently endorsed by the Minister's Office, is that correct?
Absolutely. Not only errors, there were dimensions taken off plans that were in original C321 amendments in the original incorporated document and the concept document given to us. 5 of the buildings increased in size. The Minister said they decreased, etc., etc.
Obviously, you're not a planning consultant, but in your resident opinion of the 2020 incorporated document, does the building fit within that envelope?
No. It is bigger. The areas between the buildings smaller, and the heights of the buildings higher than what was in the previously rejected amendment.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Porter.
Thank you. Councillor Bigger.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. Mr. Porter, just to clarify, earlier, I think Maria said that her frustration was with the report was there was a lack of an outcome. Is that what you're seeking in this? Did you want more of an outcome when you say you want to have meetings with Mr. Walker? Is it to get a greater outcome with this? Or just to clarify, were you happy that these two things happen simultaneously, that you have this meeting, but that you support this as it is?
We're not sure where this is going to lead. Is there a letter going to the Minister saying that this was a farce or a sham, or this process was not fair? on the residents, or is it just a future issue for planning in Victoria that this is corrected, or the fact that they can be blind on what's a story in a development? Can other members of the public do that if government do that? So there's a whole lot of those types of issues that come out of this whole process that are absolutely wrong under planning controls, and is a sign-off of a minister good enough to breach all those and ignore all those? It isn't. There's a planning system, sorry, that's not well, our opinion is it isn't. A planning system set up to be just that. It's a legal process that's been breached.
Yeah, no, I guess I'm trying to understand what you, whether you're tonight are satisfied that where we are right now with what's before us, because that's what we're trying to make a decision about at this point.
So if that was leading to something and there was going to be further review and outcomes, that's fine. If it's a dead end and it's going nowhere, then we hope that that would be expanded to include further review and outcomes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A very quick one. Mr. Porter, if it was determined that the Minister was prepared to establish a working group and use Markham as a case study, would you be happy to nominate yourself to be on that working group?
I'd absolutely love it.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
To be fair. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Porter. And our last submitter tonight is Elizabeth Porter.
Good evening, very long evening. Elizabeth Porter, 103 Ashburn Grove. I abut on to, or virtually, Markham. I've been an observer trying to see both sides and trying to maintain friendships, basically. So it's been a very difficult process. I'm not sure what this process is going to achieve, because we could achieve very little. It was interesting that Kevin Chow tried to preempt this years ago by saying, if it gets rezoned to a government residential zone, they'll have carte blanche, and that's exactly what's happened. It's like point one said the same thing, residential abutting it. We got pretty sick of their response that, oh, it's just us against public housing, and you people in the leafy green eastern suburbs, which was pathetic, given that they were going to sell off 70% of the land. So where's their issue about public housing? And so we did well with that, but otherwise it seemed like it was a barter system. We're going to give you 252 units to replace your 56 two-storey, two-bedroom development. And then they'd slip in, oh, actually it was originally 2 to 4 storey. There was so many little sneaky things stuck in. And then we sort of had a barter system, and it seemed like, oh, congratulations, you've brought it down to 178 units in a suburban residential street that's already narrowed by a bike path, and we're meant to be celebrating, and it was just such an overdevelopment, such a visual bulk. And we had people from the community saying, how did you let this happen? I thought we had a community process, and it was just an absolute sham. And so, you know, we would jump. Anytime they said we have to have a meeting, you'd come rushing home from work, and they would virtually send the work experience student who had no history, no plans, no idea what was going on, and they'd say, oh, we'll have to get back to you. They renamed the department, they renamed the companies, they changed the email addresses. Most of that folder was our effort to try and get something done. And, you know, I felt very disturbed for the council that it looked like if they put their hand up and stepped up and said, excuse me, principal, you know, we'd like to complain about this, but we'd better not speak out of turn because we mightn't get anything done if we wanted anything done with you in the future. It looked like you were powerless, we were powerless, and the whole process was ridiculous. I felt we had a very good hearing at VCAT. She was very fair. Everybody said, don't bother. Why would you bother? This is stupid. There's no legal precedent. You won't have anything. It's all wrong. She was very fair, but she said, my hands are tied. What am I meant to do? I see that they slip in residential story and all this stuff, so...
Ms. Porter, I'll have to get you to wrap up at this point in time.
No, that's fine.
Thanks
I've
very
just
much.
got one sentence that I'll... So it seems that the person who makes the rules can break the rules, then rewrite the rules, then approve the rules retrospectively, and the public and the council are absolutely powerless.
Thank you very much for your presentations. Councillors, are there any questions of the presenter? No. Officers, matters arising. Do you wish to address those?
Thanks, Chair. Look, there's nothing further for us to add.
Okay. Then I guess I'm seeking a motion from the floor.
Sorry, can we ask questions of officers?
Sorry, there wasn't anything presented. I didn't think there would. My apologies, Councillor Franco. Again, I'm not trying to duck you. It was accidental. Councillor Franco has a question.
I do have a question. Others may, I don't know. In relation to, I'd just like to understand a bit more of the history. Is it reasonable to assume that council actually requested for greater public housing at the original? Is that was part of our objection, was it? And I mean, I'll start with that. I've got a couple of questions.
Through yourself, Chair. Absolutely, that's correct. Council asked for additional public housing as part of the project.
And the different iterations or amendments as they went on, is it reasonable to assume that the current amendment or the final amendment is closer to what council originally requested? That's how I'm reading. I'm not sure if that's the case.
Through yourself, Chair. Certainly in terms of public housing, there was an additional allocation and proportion of public housing. There were still significant concerns, and they're outlined in the background of the report, still significant concerns with the final design of the proposal and the form of what the development would take. So, yes, in terms of proportion of public housing, absolutely, but not necessarily in terms of the final form of the development.
Okay, thank you.
Before we move to the other questions, our CEO would like to make a comment, if you'd like to do that now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to confirm a couple of things. One is that the original proposal for this site was to increase the public housing stock from the 52, which were originally on that site, by just 10%. So that was the original proposal. Council advocated for much more public housing, and ultimately we were successful in arguing for that outcome. We also prepared an urban design framework for this site, which stipulated what it was that we would be prepared to actually accept as a development outcome on that site, and the residents were aware of that. The ultimate outcome does not reflect the urban design framework this council actually put in place. It's quite different. It's a much larger project than we had said we would be comfortable with. Just to clarify your question a little further.
Thank you, Mr. Storer. Now we might return to Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. We'll foreshadow a motion when the time's right. I have circulated an amendment up to Mr. Wee as well, so if that could be brought up when the time is right. Officers, I do have a couple of questions. The Victorian Planning Scheme and the Planning Act, more so the Planning Act, is set aside to assist with codification of planning measures and obviously processes that are involved. What's the primary trigger for residents under the Act in terms of their ability to be heard?
Through yourself, Chair, I think this question really goes to one of the fundamental principles of the Planning and Environment Act and the planning system in Victoria. And that's really a process that has third-party involvement. So community involvement, there's a third-party right to input into the planning system and the planning outcomes. And that can occur through a planning scheme amendment, so where there's an independent panel and then ultimately a decision by the Minister for Planning and there's submissions heard by that independent panel, or alternatively, once certainly planning changes are put in place into the scheme, through a planning application process in which there's notification and objections and consideration of those objections. So that fundamental principle has been changed and eroded over time with some of the planning reforms that the state government has put in place. And some of those changes have been for quite minor or straightforward planning applications. I don't think anyone has any significant concerns with some of those minor changes on the fringes of the planning system. But there's been some other significant changes that have been made in relation to social housing, in relation to transport projects, in relation to now any range of private housing and economic stimulus type projects that can fall under this special banner that the state has set up in the planning system for facilitated projects under a major projects facilitation program. But that criteria is constantly evolving and really embraces quite a wide range of developments that the community would not normally expect would be done in a streamlined way, theoretically streamlined way through the Department of Planning without that third-party process. And that's really what this is highlighting here, is this is another example of a process that has been set up and established under the guise of delivering housing and delivering housing more quickly, that removes the third-party processes that the fundamental principle of the Victorian planning system is built upon.
And just to follow up on that, obviously there were a few bumpy roads at the very start of this project with at a parliamentary level, but once the rubber hit the road, was it as quick as it should have been, given the process that the state government went down?
Again, through yourself, Chair, we would say no, and we think the timeline that's outlined in the background to this does not demonstrate the need to have a system that removes input and process in a formal way, because it definitely has not delivered a faster outcome that could have otherwise been achieved through standard processes.
And final question here, obviously with many of these similar sorts of planning provisions, changes to planning provisions that are intended to expedite the planning process and streamline it, in this instance the state government is the developer in many respects. Have they afforded themselves privileges that the ordinary developer would not ordinarily get?
Again, through yourself, Chair, the state government, through its ministers and various agencies, has essentially established the planning rules, issued the planning approvals, and overseen the compliance with those approvals. And that certainly is a situation or a position that no other developer is able to be put in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stavro.
Thank you, Councillor Gold. Look, I have one question, and as I understand how the motion is going, I would be prepared to second it if appropriate. My sort of question is a little bit related to what Councillor Thompson was asking, but I'm a little bit perplexed because usually there's normal recourse if a government takes a decision to the courts. Are there any provisions that one can go, let's say, to VCAT and challenge those decisions? And if not, does that appear to be that the judiciary and the government are not as independent as they ought to be in this regard?
Thanks, and through yourself, Chair, absolutely there are those avenues to argue that what has been done is not in accordance with the law. The issue in this particular case and the way that this has been established is that the rules have been set up in a way that gives a lot of discretion and power to the Minister and the officers within the Department of Planning on behalf of the Minister to approve things in accordance with those rules, but to vary things if they're satisfied with the variations to the rules. So in other words, not only does the approval need to be, or the decision of those approving it was within their discretion, but if they feel that there's reason to go away from those rules, then they have the authority and power to do so. And that's the difficulty in challenging that, is that the rules would be what you are taking to court. So you're arguing that they haven't met the rules, but if the rules say you can do what you like, then it's pretty hard to argue that you can't do what you like.
Thank you. Councillor Addis.
Thanks, Chair. I'm seeking officers' thoughts on, and I'll obviously the mover, on adding an extra point that acknowledges and thanks the residents for the incredible journey they went on, the work they did to seek to improve, essentially improve public housing as well as improve the outcome for the local community. And so my question is whether we could actually acknowledge, thank, have some words that does that, because it must have been an incredibly painful and frustrating process, and it would be good if officers thought we could thank them.
Do you want to comment on that, Mr. Walker?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, more than happy to include an additional point thanking the residents for their involvement and input in this particular project.
Thank you. Councillor Bigger.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I see the sentiment, and I completely agree that the resident stories are very compelling, and probably actually should form, in some ways, more a part of this report. But I guess for me, I'm curious to know, what we believe this will achieve. Because what I see, quite unusually for us, particularly in UPDC, is that we have that the UPDC is resolving to note two things and potentially thank residents. And that feels very, I don't want to be disrespectful, but it feels, it doesn't feel like very much. And so I'm just wondering why so two questions. One, is what we hope to achieve. And I think the second question is whether we have considered or could consider an approach which is, a bit more positively proactive about some of the principles or lessons learned, because the way we framed up point 2 is really quite negative. These were all the things that didn't work. I get they didn't work, but that doesn't necessarily help us to change. And my guess would be that what the residents most want is, just like patients when they complain about something, is they most want the next patient not to go through what they've been through. And I don't feel that sorry, I'm speaking rather than asking a question. I'm keen to know what you think this will achieve.
Thanks, through yourself, Chair. And I certainly take the point, and perhaps I need to go back to the overall understanding of why this has been put on the table. And this has been put on the table to document and demonstrate and show the process that was involved in the commencement through to the final delivery of this particular project. And this project is one that's been referred to in the submissions and reports that Council has put forward in regard to the state government's proposed planning reforms, both before and in response to the housing statement. So by documenting and demonstrating and putting this on the record, it provides a closure on the process for this particular project and reinforces this as an example that supports the submissions that Council has put forward as part of planning reform projects. So we can point back to this and we can show this and demonstrate this.
Sorry, can I just ask a follow-up question?
Yes, please.
So that feels more to me like this is an action supporting something we're doing somewhere else rather than an action in and of itself. And yeah, is that correct?
Yes, this is, well, it's doing two things. Firstly, it's noting the completion of the process for this particular project, but yes, it does then set that as a clear, documented, transparent example that is referred to in submissions that are elsewhere by the council in terms of the planning reform. And that will be a continuing part of our advocacy in achieving changes or different approaches to the planning system into the future. So,
and in those other documents, do we recommend, positive principles? Again, rather than this, just sort of this is what didn't work. Do we ever lay out, these are the things that we think are fundamental? This is what community consultation looks like, or this is what,
absolutely, yes, and certainly in the housing statement submission put forward last year in response to the housing statement in September, certainly includes significant discussion of what the planning system should look like and some of the fundamental principles of the planning system. And really that's underpinned by third-party processes. That's really, if we want to highlight what's one fundamental principle in the Victorian planning system, it is that third-party process. It's the involvement of the community in a formal way where they have a right to have their say and have their input. Doesn't mean that they'll always get the outcome that they want, but they have a right in that process.
Thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two questions, if I may. I think the first one should be fairly brief. Mr. Walker, do you know if any of the residents of the 56 properties that were demolished in 2016, have any of those residents been allocated accommodation in what is being built on that site now? Because I understand they were displaced for 5 or 6 years during the time from when their original homes were demolished until the new construction was habitable.
Through yourself, Chair, my understanding is that they were offered places at the new development. I'm not sure whether anyone has taken up that opportunity.
Right, well, that is a good outcome, and hopefully some have been able to. My next question is with regard to council and community consultation, where there was a consistent and well-considered advocacy to increase the allocation of public and social housing. And the report indicates there was the mixed tenure of, sort of the mixture of dwellings within the complexes. And I just wanted to ask if you're able to say exactly what we did end up with an increase of public housing compared to where it started initially. I think it was implied there might have been 51 apartments, and I believe that through strong advocacy we increased that number quite considerably.
Through yourself, Chair, and maybe I'll be corrected as I'm talking. As I understand it, the original public housing had 52 dwellings before it was demolished. I think primary 2-bedroom dwellings, yes. And I think the final approved development ended up with 111 public housing dwellings.
Which is a powerful statement and something the Burundara community can be very proud of. Thank you.
Councillor Franco, you've got your light on again. Do you wish to ask another question?
Yes, look, just following on from the questions from Councillor Bigger. The report doesn't, looks at, you say it reviews the end of the project, but it doesn't review the project in terms of, say, the final outcome and whether we're happy with the final outcome. It looks at the process deficiencies in terms of consultation and the various other procedural concerns that the residents have outlined as well. But it doesn't really go to the heart of what's finally there, and are we satisfied with what's there? and, you know, is it a good outcome ultimately for the community? And I'm wondering why we haven't done that, whether the state government might reply, and I presume we've gone to the residents, but we haven't gone to the state government. I can understand that, but might they not argue that ultimately they've achieved a greater amount of public housing than might otherwise have been achieved, or greater housing, which is the state government's stated objective, than had they have left the amendment in, gone with whatever Burundara Council's original amendment was. And I don't know that, so I'm curious your reflections on that.
Through yourself, Chair, absolutely this report is about process. This is about demonstrating an example of how an approval process for this type of project works and operates, because it is in the context of a changing planning system. So that's what the focus of this report was. It wasn't about the ins and outs of the final development outcome and whether that complies with the approvals and the like. That's an interesting process in itself. There's not many avenues to pursue concerns if there are, but that is certainly, there's certainly components of this project that are still in discussion and advocacy with Homes Victoria, both by residents and by council, because there are still matters that are outstanding and still being finalised. So that is a separate process, but was deliberately kept out of this report, because this report is about the process from start to finish of this project from an approvals point of view.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appear to have exhausted questions around the table. Returning to you, Councillor Thompson, are you in a position to move a motion?
I am. I think the officers have got something up on the screen, and I'll just, whilst you're there, officers, if we could add at the end of section 4, comma, and recommend improvements for future. So this serves in two parts. One, to thank the residents for their achieving a better outcome for public housing in the local community. The second one goes on to, or item 4 goes on to write to the Minister for Planning, expressing, I guess, our concerns about the process and make recommendations for the future.
All right, would you like a minute to consider that? Councillor Park, your light's on, but Councillor Stavro offered to second a while ago.
Well, firstly, one can't foreshadow seconding, but that's not the reason for my light being on. I wanted to suggest that the mover might consider doing what we've done at times in the past and including in paragraph 4 our other state members who represent Burundara. So this meaning the upper and lower house members that represent the area.
That's fine. Yep, thank you.
Local and state members. Local state members. Local state members. Councillor Park, are you happy with that addition that you're recommending, or otherwise? Councillor Thompson, are you happy with that amendment?
That's perfectly fine, and it's consistent with other letters.
Can I ask one quick one? I think Councillor Park just not want to put words in your mouth, but do you mean all members, state and otherwise?
Local state members covers it, I would have thought.
State and federal, I mean.
It's not a federal matter, though.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, we happy with that? I'm now in search of a seconder. Councillor Stavro, thank you. Is there anyone opposed to this motion? There are. Well, let's move, I think, then to debate. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'll say first and foremost, to encourage my colleagues, this is about the process that our residents have been through as well as council. It's the way that the incorporated document was tabled and obviously how it's actually evolved since the construction have started. It's not about the outcome at Markham. The outcome at Markham, in my own personal view, is actually quite good. The architectural response is good. It was well designed, it's been well put together, and it certainly delivered a far greater outcome for public housing, without doubt, from where it started. As the CEO indicated, it started with 52 units existing on site with a 10% uplift, which only took it to 55. It's well in excess of 100. And where there was proposed to be private housing sold off, it's now social housing. So this site has remained solely and wholly in the state's hands for future developments. That is fact, and council supported that. That is fact, and it's written fact. Council's never been opposed to public housing on the site. It's always advocated for more. This motion here is purely and simply about the process that our residents went through and we went through at council. And if it can go part way, it's been a 7-year journey for our residents, and it's had a huge impact personally on them, where commitments have been made and taken away at the same time. If this in any part can actually serve towards improving outcomes where this might occur in the future, and I think it will, it'll serve our community better, it'll serve the planning system better, and it'll serve us as a council better. To let it pass is effectively saying, as a council, we don't really care about the democratic system that the planning system affords, that we're happy for everything to be centralised, and therefore we no longer need to really become the relevant planning authority. And our residents, we can just refer to the state. We've got to stand up for an improved planning outcome and an improved planning system. This is merely giving feedback. This was new to the state when this was introduced, and it's certainly something that can be improved upon, and we'll see more of it in the future, and if we can be part of that improvement, then we should hold ourselves in high regard. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Stavro, do you wish to comment at this point in time or reserve your right?
I will reserve my right, Councillor Colt.
Councillor Franco.
Thank you, Chair. I actually agree pretty much with everything that Councillor Thompson has said, but I just disagree on the resolution, on the proposed motion, and I'll try and articulate why. I mean, I share all the concerns about the poor processes that were demonstrated. I'm very concerned by the experiences that many of the residents had and the issues that are outlined, and I do think we need to take a stance and advocate for better process and planning outcomes, etc. And I think process is related to outcomes, but that's a separate point. But I do think we should certainly be advocating for improving processes. I'm just concerned about how we've gone about it and what's happening here. We've got a report before us that's quite damning about process, but the report that's before us really should be the report that's referenced in point 4 in the last few words, past the comma, and recommend improvements for the future. I would have much preferred a report that is factual and recommending a way forward in the current context, because this is really about the context of the proposed housing reforms and housing goals before us. We've got a report that just slams, here's everything that's wrong. We're issuing that report saying we've got these experiences of our residents in Ashburton and what they went through. Look at this, how terrible it was. And, you know, in the context of current reforms, and this is actually not so much to look back to the past, but we're saying it's actually to look to the future and the other impacts that could potentially occur here to in our community in Boroondara. And if we actually want to engage with the government and say, look, here's some of the lessons we've learned, these are the recommendations, these are the things we'd like to see in future if you're going to go down a path of the housing outcomes, this is the way we should present it. This is the recommendations in a positive way, saying, look at the mistakes, if you like, that occurred, and here it is documented. But instead we've got now a report that's written in the negative, and we're saying we'll leave it to officers. We won't, as the UPDC, as the elected councillors, review those recommendations. We'll leave it to officers who drafted this report to put together that package to go to the minister and potentially to the shadow minister and to other players. And we won't see that report necessarily. So that concerns me, because actually those recommendations, that's what I want to see as an elected representative. That's where I want to see us making a difference. And I put this in context as well. The MAV put out a paper, you know, looking at collaborative methods, this council has come out on the public record slamming the MAV for that. It just becomes too easy to slam rather than to necessarily put forward an engagement approach and a vision for how we can collaborate, how we think things could and should be done better. And ultimately, if this report, that should be a public report, should be a report to the UPDC recommending those improvements, and that way we could engage, consider those recommendations and put forward a vision for what we see, and that's what I'd like. And it's for those reasons that I can't support that motion. Thanks.
Councillor Bigger.
Yep. I agree, Councillor Thompson, with what you've said, and I agree, Councillor Franco, with what you've said. And basically, I think that I appreciate what we're trying to do, because I do think that the stories of the residents are incredibly compelling. And to be honest, we haven't even heard the stories of the residents of public housing who have presumably been, as Councillor Hollingsworth mentioned, been frustrated by this process and dislodged and disadvantaged. And so things could have been better. And I guess that for me, though, is where, when I hear residents, and again, Maria, for instance, who said straight away, well, what is the outcome of this? I feel that that's missing. So for me, it's actually the process, our process here, that I'm not confident about the way we're going about this. I don't see how this is going to achieve anything maybe for us and for our residents to really improve the way this happens in future. And I think that is our aim, and I commend that. I just don't have the confidence that that this particular approach is the right way tonight.
Councillor Addis.
Thanks, Chair. I think the truth is this won't achieve anything, because the whole process has been about not listening to council and not listening to residents. It's been a very long journey, a very long time of people feeling disregarded, both council and residents. And to use the common jargon, I think this report's about truth-telling. It's the truth of what happened during this process. And I think it's pointless and fruitless for us to put more time into giving the government advice about how the process could be better. They couldn't care less about that. They made that abundantly clear through this process. So for me, no more work should be wasted on trying to explain to a group of people how something could be better. This is about acknowledging to the residents how awful this process was. And that's really all it's about. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I have listened to all the comments from my councillor colleagues, and I do believe that the report is factual. I do believe it's in chronological order of events that have taken place over many years, and I do believe it reinforces council's advocacy to work with the state to deliver a better outcome, a more meaningful outcome, to support an increased allocation of public housing. So I think the report captures that very well. It's about learning and it's about moving forward, and hopefully the ministers will engage with us for future project applications. When I asked Mr. Porter before if he considered being part of a working group, I see that as an olive branch where we can actually work with community and with our ministers and with council to learn from this experience and hopefully improve in the future. So I support the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Now, Councillor Stavro, Councillor Gillies wishes to speak. Do you wish to wait till she's spoken? Or? Thank you. Councillor Gillies.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Just briefly, the core of this proposal for me is that the community consultation was a farce. It clearly caused a lot of stress and trauma for, what, about 7 years? I too acknowledge the fact that that's been dreadful for the local community, and that includes people on waiting lists, waiting for housing allocations as well. To have gone on so long and ebbed and flowed with rule changing, document changing, and all the games that we've heard about, which I have no doubt are true, I think this action is one that may be in vain, but I think that should not stop us. I know we need to be realistic, and they're not going to turn around and change the ways of process because of what we say, but I think we have a very clear responsibility to our community and frankly to ourselves to respond with some strength. I don't think asking the government to consider doing it in a nicer, better, more genuine, consultative manner is going to have much effect. I think we need to be clear and firm, and that can include improvements. There'll be our recommendations. We'll see if they're ever listened to. But I think it's wrong for us to not do this with strength. So I completely support the motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Park.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Addis as two councillors who actually endured the whole process from the beginning. The frustration that council and councillors felt right the way through, where there was just a total unwillingness by the state government to meaningfully engage. And I think the motion that's been moved is a significant improvement on the motion that we first had, and I agree with the sentiments expressed by the first submitter that it didn't really go anywhere, whereas this one does. It would be useful. I think nobody has disagreed with what Councillor Thompson had to say in moving the motion, that the difference of opinion is perhaps how the matters ought to be communicated. But we're in the position to give the gift of feedback, and it may or may not be welcome. It may or may not be heard, but it's incumbent upon us to actually take the time to look back and say, well, you know, it's not even we told you so, but it's look, let's reflect on what's happened and try and work towards doing it better next time. And it seems to me that would be great as a unanimous message from this council. That may not be achievable, but would certainly be optimal, because the community went to great lengths to work with council in very challenging circumstances, and ultimately the government's intent, unwavering intent to avoid proper process was very unfortunate, and if they'd been willing to engage more with council, I've got no doubt that the outcomes would have been significantly better. And somehow those are the learnings that we need to communicate. If the present government won't take them on board, then perhaps some future government will. But it's important that we actually put on record where we stand.
Thank you, Councillor Park. Councillor Stavro, a seconder. Do you wish to speak now?
Thank you, Chair. Look, I agree with everything that my colleagues have said, if not the precise letter of every single thing, but certainly the spirit. And also commend those councillors that were much closer to this and fought hard despite what would have been appearing as an upward battle. But, you know, in the end of the day, you've got to fight what you believe in and help your community. And I can certainly remember one of the first outings down with Councillor Thompson, Councillor Gillies and other councillors with, you know, side by side with the community there. And well, the reason why I feel passionate about this is not certainly by proximity to my ward, but it is, I feel the pain of the residents, and also confess in reading the report, I became disappointed, bewildered, sad of how we've come to this. And the emotions were sort of kind of going one against the other and rotating. And look, I reflect on the past challenges that we've faced, and such as the Kew Cottages estate, where it seemed that community voices were disregarded again. And it was very disheartening to read a wonderful report that outlined, effectively, case study-wise, almost how to improve things going forward. And I guess that is where I'm motivated by, to ensure that we get better outcomes, and a little bit more optimistic by those councillors that think that we might not be able to. But again, I want to acknowledge the officers for commendable work in bringing this report to the committee and shedding light on the issue. I sort of am in disbelief that we are in this situation again, and we mustn't let it pass and not say something substantial. There is a silver lining. We see that the majority of residents we learn have moved in, and that's a significant step forward. And I think that I think every councillor in the room supports social and affordable housing. That is not the question. The big question is that the lack of consultation, transparency, and due process should concern everyone, and I put that in capitals. And when I say everyone, I mean also the state government, and really urge them to commit to a more collaborative approach in future projects. I think that would be a good start. We mustn't abide by the ends justify the means. I think no group, no person is infallible, so doing that really puts massive risks in anything, and we've seen many people have been hurt here, and others have been hurt in other projects, and no doubt they'll be hurt, and worse things can come in the future if we don't change. This approach must be consigned to another era into history, as it makes a mockery of democracy, as Councillor Thompson said, and it creates really unfair outcomes. And I'll be brief and finalise it with a few more words, just to really beg or ask the government to turn the page and stand united with our community and the council, stand united for transparency, stand united for community engagement, stand united for due process and a democracy that thrives on the strength of our voices. I support obviously the motion as a seconder, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stavro. I return to the mover to close out debate.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I do, can I just seek a point of order to see if I can amend one sentence and test it with the seconder? And that is paragraph 3. It might actually garner some more support in this council. Paragraph 3, thank the residents for their commitment to work with council to collectively achieve a better outcome for public housing in the local community.
You happy with that, Councillor Thompson?
To work with council? Yep, correct. Thank you.
Councillor Stavro, were you happy to second that?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
All right.
Subject to obviously any other debate against that, but obviously if I can go and speak to that, that'd be great.
Okay. Are we happy that Councillor Thompson can now round out debate? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, colleagues, for the debate on this. This has obviously been I think you have to be the ward councillor or the mayor of the day to understand the impact that this has had on the Ashburton community. And it's not just an isolated development like what we heard previously, which comes and goes in the blink of an eyelid. This has been 7 years of journey for our residents. It's been full of promise, but it's really the process has let them down at every corner. Every time there's been a glimmer of hope, they've been let down. And there is nothing that we can do now to change the past. It is what it is, but there is a great opportunity for us to actually inform the future. It does, as Councillor Addis says, and I love the term, it should be a truth-telling story. It hasn't been pleasant by any means. We have actually achieved a really good outcome for public housing. That is something that we can hold that high and shout that in the street. Absolutely. And we can never be criticised for being anti-public housing in this council because we've been pro. In fact, more pro than the state has been pro. But the planning process has been a debacle. Some would say it's a sham. Some would use other harsher words. But the reality is it has let our community down and it's let us as a council down. And if we can inform a better outcome for the future, for wherever it be, whether it's in your ward or even in other municipalities where this has occurred, we've got to stand up. And I'd encourage everyone to support this motion. And those that are opposed to it, maybe they should simply abstain. But I certainly have empathy for my residents. I feel for them on their journey. And my heart goes out to them, to be honest. They've now got what they've got, and there's no turning back. But we can collectively, including our residents, inform a better future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. I will now put that motion, or the motion that's before you. All of those in favour? All of those against? All of those abstaining? Can we rerun that?
Mr. Chair, where is your vote?
And Chair, I will call a division anyway, so you get to cast your vote again.
That's a new vote, thank you. All right, calling a division. Those in favour? Those against? Oh, sorry, I'll go. Put your hands up again, I'll go around. Councillor Park, Councillor Sinfield, this is in favour. Councillor Stavro, Councillor, oh dear bear, Councillor Gillies, Councillor Watson, Councillor Thompson, Councillor Addis. Hollingsworth, my apologies, I missed you. I've been too polite.
And yourself,
And
Chair.
myself, Councillor Gold. Those against? No one. Those abstaining? Councillor Bigger and Councillor Franco. Thank you. That finishes the business of the general or the substantive business of the evening. We will move now to general business, and we have a number of items of general business. Councillor Gillies, we'll throw to you first.
I do have an item, thank you, Chair. If I may indulge my colleagues briefly. Some names are etched into the foundations of our municipality, Mary Drost, who passed away peacefully on January the 4th, is surely one of them. Myself and the Mayor, Councillor Hollingsworth, represented council at her service. Mary was a multifaceted person, a genteel lady with a backbone of steel, who has been described as both a joyful, generous, animated woman of deep faith and a fierce crusader of planning environment and heritage causes. She understood the importance of respecting and preserving heritage in both built form and social context, a message she took regularly to local and state government officials for over 30 years. Mary was 92 when she passed away, by the way. Very active into her 90s, she was convener of Planning Backlash Inc., which later renamed as Planning Democracy, although most of our local community identified her with the Burundara Residents Action Group, established in 2004, and as a passionate pro-heritage advocate. Mary was a councillor for the City of Camberwell, as was at the time for 3 years, 1982 to 85, and on many occasions since, she has presented to this chamber in support of heritage preservation. She would look us all firmly in the eye and remind us that the baton was in our hands and that we needed to take heritage responsibilities very seriously. I think we can probably all guess what Mary's thoughts might have been on some of tonight's matters, but anyway. So, I say hats off to a lady on a mission. Mary Alma Josephine Drost, OAM, may she rest in peace. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gillies. Councillor Thompson, I believe you have an item of general business.
I do. In fact, I've got two, Chair. But I'll start in a similar vein to Councillor Gillies, acknowledging the passing of another former councillor of Camberwell, as Councillor Drost was, and that is the former councillor and mayor of the City of Camberwell, Neville Lee, OAM. Neville was an Ashburton resident for the majority of his life, grew up with 4 children and a lovely wife, became elected to council in September 1956 and did so commencing his life as an advocate for what he said was the neglected Ashburton, the lower end of our municipality, the lower end of Camberwell at the time. Inadequate childcare facilities was one of the main attributes that he got elected on. And once he was elected, he was able to oversee, or the council was able to oversee 15 to 20 kindergartens. He was also a founding member of the City of Camberwell Historical Society, that still goes strong today. He was the chair of the Ashburton and District Senior Citizens Welfare Committee, which has been through a number of evolutions and is now Samarinda Aged Care Services that continues to support our residents in Ashburton. He also established the Ashie Op Shop, which is also a great support for our residents as well. He's got a number of achievements, and he was a big advocate for Burundara Council. He's played an active role in many of even our current councillors around the table, giving us advice throughout our campaigns, as well as giving us frank advice once we're actually elected to council. And he was just a fabulous man. My heart goes out to all of his family, and I'll be attending his memorial service next week. So, Vale Neville Lee, OAM. Thank you.
You had another item, Councillor?
I do, and it was just picking up, Chair, on the previous item, and this is maybe for a discussion at CB&D, but I'll flag it for officers, and that is, I'll get my notes here, whether or not we actually prepare a heritage at risk ledger or register for properties that maybe we start with individually significant properties in the municipality that are being left to fall apart, that we can have those prepared and considered in terms of what it might take to actually then advocate to the state if we actually are successful with our item 3.2. And that may or may not, subject to CB&D, extend to contributory properties, but certainly the individually significant properties, we really do need to do our utmost to protect those.
Thank you, Councillor. I noticed that our CEO would like to make a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to build on and perhaps redirect the way we might think about that, because Council has no powers in relation to people choosing to allow their properties to deteriorate. The way the local law works is that Council can only become involved on the basis the property is in some way unsafe from a health point of view, in other words, it's a harbourage for vermin, or indeed it's unsightly. But the fact that somebody chooses to leave doors open or windows open to allow a property to deteriorate, which is an intent sometimes we see in place, we don't have any power to deal with that. So what you're really asking is that we contemplate putting propositions to the Minister to actually change the legislation of the state so that we have more power, whether that be by virtue of a local law or a planning scheme provision. So I just think you can create all the registers you like, but you can actually do nothing with it. So what I'm understanding is you actually want to be able to have some level of control over people choosing to allow their properties to deteriorate purposefully on the basis that is a way of getting around the heritage protections. That's a different discussion.
Look, what you've said, Mr. CEO, is perfectly in the line with where I was going. So I think if we can skip the register and jump straight to the outcome or advocacy for the outcome, I'm fully supportive.
Sure, okay.
Okay, Councillor Stavro, you have an item of general business.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, over the weekend, I became aware of some strong rumours that the post office in High Street Q would be closing. Earlier today, it's sad to say that I spoke to the manager there and they've confirmed the rumours. Really want to, I guess, bring it to the attention of everybody, and also that for my community that really needs the services that the post office provided. What we'll be doing is work in council to the best of our powers to explore options and what we can do to get further clarifications on their intentions after they close. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. Very quick. I just wanted to ask if Councillor Gillies and Councillor Thompson agree if their tributes to Mary Drost OAM and Neville Lee, past Councillor and Mayor, and also Mary Drost, past Councillor, if they can be recorded in the minutes so that people that may not have been able to attend the meeting this evening have the opportunity to view the beautiful tributes to amazing people. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Franco.
Thank you. Two items. Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd also just like to acknowledge Neville Lee. He was a person I held in great esteem. In later years, he became a resident of Camberwell and was always passionate about the well-being of our community. And in addition to the many issues that Councillor Thompson raised, he was an early supporter and very keen and outspoken advocate of Camberwell Green, and he provided a lot of support to the campaign and to the efforts to achieve Camberwell Green, and it's something I'm very indebted to him for, and it was really wonderful, the support he provided. On a separate note, just in relation to item 3.3, the Markham Estate, I'd ask that the report or the submission that officers eventually do make to the state government, that be circulated to councillors, the report with the recommendations for improvements. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. Just following the general business item raised by Councillor Thompson, the Heritage at Risk Register, I wonder if the Director of Urban Living might list that as an agenda item at the next Heritage Advisory Committee meeting in May.
through yourself, Chair, you're happy to do so. In fact, we actually already have started work on such a list.
Thank you.
Does that exhaust the comments, general business around the horseshoe table? I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate Mark Cubit. As we know, he chairs Electrify Burundara, and to say that he was recognised in the Australia Day Honours for significant services to the community, particularly his work in the charity area. He's now a member of the Order of Australia AM. Thank you. Moving to urgent business. Any urgent business? No. Confidential business? None. I'd therefore like to close the meeting. Before I close the meeting, I want to thank all of you who have joined us this evening, and I declare this meeting of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting now closed. Thank you.